Hi guys, this is Zach with the Paradox Institute, and today we will be responding to Forrest Valkai's Sex and Sensibility video, specifically on the biology of sex.
What is the
Oh, hi there.
thing
I wasn't
about?
actually reading this. My name's Forrest. I'm a biologist and I make educational science videos on the internet. Not too long ago, I made a TikTok video about what it means to be trans or intersex. And ever since that day, I've been tagged in about 1,000 different videos of people making the same stupid arguments that we've all heard a million times. Things like,
don't
oh,
say
you're either XX
stupid
or XY,
arguments,
or
huh?
boys act like this and girls look like that, or you can't change your gender any more than you can change your age or your species. And I figured that I could make a bunch of different TikTok videos, each one trying to cram into 60 seconds just how asinine these arguments actually are. Or I could just make one solid YouTube video that explains in layman's
for a
terms
long time.
how this whole two-gender system works, or doesn't work from a biological perspective. Before we begin, however, we're going to need to get a few things straight. First of all, humans are animals. We are living things, and we are not plants, and we are not fungi, and we are not bacteria. We are animals, and we obey the same laws of...
Like you said, how does he know? How does he know
Yeah.
we're animals?
Well, yeah, okay. First of all, if we're going to talk about classification and taxonomy,
Let's start with that.
What
how
is
we
an
classify
animal?
things. Yeah.
and if we're human and that's a solid thing, like we're human,
Mm-hmm.
why can we as humans get organ transplants from animals? Like there's infamously a study that was done where they were growing pig and human hybrid organs for
Mhm.
transplant to make them more successful in humans. Which like that's horrific.
Yeah.
But so yeah, why that? Why if we like if that's a solid thing that we're humans, what does
Yeah.
that mean? Like
Right.
why are we not on a binary, like, or not binary, why are we not on a bimodal
Yeah.
scale between pigs and humans?
Right. Why is there a category that we can say is human and a category we can say is pig, even though we share,
Yeah.
like with most mammals, the vast majority of our genes in common? How can we differentiate those categories?
Exactly. So why are some categories rigid in Forrest's mind, but not others?
Right. So he's going to be talking about how male and female are not rigid,
Right.
but he's saying right here that species divide, at least with like the examples he gave,
Mm-hmm.
that divide is rigid.
Right.
Fungi, plants, animals,
Mhm.
across those different kingdoms, that those
Yeah.
are those are
Like-
real divisions, but
Yeah.
then he'll say that male and female are not actual
Right.
realistic divisions.
And
so
see that's the trick he plays, is that all of these things really have overlap.
Mhm.
They all have overlap.
Right. And just because two categories or multiple categories overlap in certain
Yeah.
traits, it does not mean that those categories are socially constructed.
Right. And this whole stupid argument he's making falls apart anyway. As soon as you get into identities like non-binary or the neo-pronouns, like I said in the
How
last
so?
video, because he's saying he's going to go into the brain sex. He's only talking about categories like male and female. But then, okay, well, how do we classify like non-binary, like other than appropriating DSDs, which we can only treat because we know which ones are male and which
Yeah.
ones are female.
Yeah.
We only can identify them because of the sex binary.
Right.
We can only identify what even ovotestes is,
Yeah.
because we know what ovaries are and we know what testes are.
Mhm. He'll get into that later in the video too.
Yeah.
We can
So
we can do that. Talk about that. Yeah.
It's
So
just
even
kind of-
something like non-binary, in terms of people identifying as non-binary, it references itself to male and female.
Right. Like
it defines itself
has-
in reference to male and
to
female.
reference back to something.
Right.
And it is just really silly
Yeah.
that he's like doing this. And then again, deconstruction without construction.
Yeah.
There is no replacement for
Yeah.
anything. Like he's establishing that there are solid categories.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to humans, suddenly, oh man, when it comes to
Right.
sex, oh man, that all falls apart. Like
Right.
we can't have those categories anymore.
Even though sex is a far more categorical, far stronger divide than something like species, because sex in the two sexes existed far, far before most species,
Yeah.
more than 1 billion years ago.
Yeah.
And so we'll
Like,
get into that detail as
yeah.
well, but yeah,
Sorry, we could just debunk this whole thing right now in the first 5 minutes, but
let's continue.
Go for it.
Nature as every other animal. I'm throwing this in here right at the outset because I want to try to avoid the insane argument that we are somehow special or have some privileged place in this world. We're not, and we don't.
Right. Which
Second
is
of all,
why
throughout the
gender
course of this video, I'm going to be arguing against the binary model
means
of things like
nothing.
sex and gender, but I'm still going to use terms like male and female and girl and boy. This is just for the sake of convenience. If I were to make a long-form argument like this and have special language for the whole thing, this video would be unwatchable.
So
It's
he's going to
already
use
unwatchable, first of all.
he's going to use the terms male and female,
Yeah.
but he says that it's just for convenience.
Well,
They don't actually have a
again,
real foundational meaning.
He's saying that. But you know why it's convenient, buddy? Is because you cannot define gender, any gender, because they say there's no way to be this gender. But you don't know for sure if that's female. Don't know for sure if that's male because there's this case and that case. And, can't say for sure that this is, non-binary because there's no way to be non-binary. There's no way to be a man. There's no way to be a woman. Like, so then it's meaningless. There is no definition that he could use. There's no term because the term is not referring to a category, an observable thing that we can look at and be like, yep, that's that.
What
or
term?
Like any term
Any
for
term.
gender. Like he can't use any term.
Yeah, because
He-
he's saying that
Yeah.
sex is
He
not a real category.
No, gender is not a real category. That's why he can't use a term
Yeah,
other than boy, girl, male, female,
yeah,
man, woman. He
Yeah.
can't use anything else because he cannot define it. He can't observe it. He can't measure it. He can't establish
Yeah.
a definition for it because non-binary can be anything.
Yeah.
Trans-masc can be anything.
yeah. All these different genders that we're talking
Yes.
about. Yeah,
All of those things can be anything now. And if
Yeah.
you say otherwise, that is transphobic.
Yep.
So he can't.
yeah,
He can't. He can say fungi, he can say fish, animal, whatever.
because we don't have identity,
Right.
an identity ideology attached to those
Right.
labels.
Why can he use those terms? Why can he use boy, girl, man, woman? Because we can see it with our eyes, we can measure it, we can study it, we can definitively say that things are those terms
Mhm.
because it's a set of characteristics that we have applied a name to. That's all it is. So that's why he can't
He can't
say-
not use those
Yeah,
terms
and he
because-
can't use anything else. That's why
because we have a shared language
Right.
for when you say male and female or boy and girl or man and woman. We
Mhm.
have an understanding of what those terms relate to in the
Yeah.
world, what characteristics they're describing,
Right.
right? And so that is why he can't dispense with them, is because they
Right.
are real categories that exist in the world, real physical
Right.
systems that exist in the world.
But even then, he would probably say, well, there's no real way to define boy or girl or male or
Which
female.
he will do,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm sure, because I can already see the trajectory of where this is going. Which is why he can't do like a video where he would use whatever made up term
Yeah.
he wants to use, whatever magical gender term he wants to use. Like it's not going to go anywhere because it would just be a circular definition of, well, you can't really, I mean, usually, generally,
Yeah,
and
that's the
well,
pattern.
actually, and then it falls apart and then gender means nothing other than how you self-identify.
See, here's the problem. So as he goes through this video, as we'll show, he continues to deconstruct and deconstruct and deconstruct, and then he tries to uphold and reinforce gender identity as a category, but he has no basis to stand on.
Right, yeah. Like,
He's destroyed all his foundation.
yeah.
So it doesn't actually help
No.
even the people he's trying to
It
support,
really doesn't.
because he's arguing for categories that can't be
I
defined, or the destruction or the dismantling of categories ultimately.
I really don't know how he has a fan base in the trans community, because he's trying to say that there is a definitive way to be trans or whatever. Like,
With his
just,
brain
yeah.
sex hypothesis that we
Well,
covered
not,
in our
not just
neuroscience
brain
video.
sex, but biologically, like, oh, like there's a basis for being trans. There's a big, because you can't definitively say that you're one
Mm-hmm.
sex or the other. So he's trying to establish that there's some essence to it or some way, but really it's just up to self-identification.
Yes,
Which is meaningless.
because those who do identify as trans, or just specifically trans activists, they do
Yeah.
not want a criteria or measurement
Right,
for
they
being
don't.
trans.
So locking them into, oh, there's some criteria or some measurement, that is,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
just a magic thing you can't define, and shouldn't even try to define,
Right.
really, because that's,
Because then you're
queer people.
enforcing categories,
Right.
which is very much against queer theory, which is about dismantling and subverting
Yeah.
categories and subverting the norm.
Right.
Okay, let's continue.
So I'm counting on you to be able to follow along. You're also going to need to understand some pretty basic biological terminology,
Don't-
so I'm going to run through a
don't
very
put
quick
the
vocab list for
educational
you.
burden
If you
on
don't want to
me.
sit
Okay,
through
let's
that,
see-
just
let's
jump
see.
to this part of the video. But I strongly encourage that everybody stick around, because this might help avoid some confusion later on. Cells are the most fundamental unit of life. In fact, they're the smallest things that we can call alive. Your body is made of lots and lots of cells of all sorts of different shapes and sizes that all do different things. DNA is the instruction manual that your body uses to do most things, mainly just making proteins. You have DNA in almost every single cell in your body. A long stretch of DNA that codes for one particular thing is called a gene, and a bunch of DNA, a bunch of genes, all squished together and coiled up into a little wad is called a chromosome. Humans have 46 chromosomes that are broken up into 23 pairs. You get 23 from your dad and 23 from your mom. Each pair does pretty much the same thing. By the way, fun fact, if you were to take all of the DNA out of just one of your cells, all 46 chromosomes, unwind them all and stretch them out end to end, it would be about as long as me, a little over 6 feet long. And that's just in one cell! Another term that you're going to want to know is the term dimorphic.
Wow.
So,
humble
first
brag
of all-
about his height.
Yeah.
But
First of all, you have the different categories of gene, chromosome,
Right.
DNA. Those are different categories that have specific functions in
Right.
biology, and he's describing those functions. But how can he do that if
Right. Also, I love that he said humans have this many chromosomes.
Yes,
which
and that
does
you
not
get-
account for chromosomal disorders.
No, it does not, but he'll get into that later on.
Yeah, I know,
But-
but that's what I'm saying.
Right.
Like, if he's going to deconstruct based on, oh, well, you can't call it this because, you have this exception sometimes. Like,
Yeah, isn't by saying that humans have a certain pair of chromosomes, that is what he's saying is the standard template, which he
Yeah.
directly argues against later. He says there is
Right.
no standard template later.
right.
He just said that that's the template.
so,
That's what humans are given.
like,
And he says that they're given a half by the mom and half by the dad.
what's
What
a mother and
what
what's
is
a
mother?
father?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There must be some meaning
Forrest.
for that.
It is so hard for me to watch this and not just like yell at him the whole time, because he's just
Well,
he
we're-
contradicts himself.
we're just getting
constantly,
started, so you
and I
better
know-
buckle up.
Oh my god, why did you do this to me? It's a weekend.
Yeah.
I don't need this kind of stress on a weekend.
So now he's going to talk about dimorphic.
Great.
Di means two, morph means shape, so dimorphism is the state of having two different shapes. This is what we call it whenever a species has differently shaped males and females. And in case you want to know, the term for having males and females in the first place is called being dioecious. A monoecious species only has one sex. A dioecious species has two.
Okay, this is the first part where there's just a blatant error, and it's in the definition of dioecious and monoecious. Dioecious and monoecious are terms that are used in plants specifically, and they're a way to describe sexual systems in plants and how male and female are composed in plants. Dioecious is a term for a plant that has separate males and females. So one individual plant will just have male flowers, and another individual plant will just have female flowers. So di, and it's separated into two different plants, the sexes in two different plants. Monoecious, he said, monoecious describes species with one sex. That's not true. Monoecious is a term for male and female systems where the sexes exist in one plant. So, for example, one individual plant will have a male flower and a female flower. So it's two sexes in one. It's not one sex, it's two sexes in one. That's why it's monoecious. And
wow, he got something wrong catastrophically. What a shock. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
with the
Especially
actual,
with the definition.
yeah, exactly.
Oh my gosh.
With
That
the-
is so weird because he loves definitions
Yep,
and being consistent
got
with
it
them.
wrong.
Oh my gosh.
With the actual suffix ecious, that describes the arrangement of sexual organs. It's how the male and female systems are composed. So di just means separated, male in one individual, female in another individual, and mono means male and female in the same individual, two sexes in one. So that's a basic error that he had at
I
first.
think, have you done that in a video? Like covered that in a video?
I have not. No, that'd
You
be
should.
helpful too. Yeah.
Yes.
Because there are
definitely.
many complex terms
Yeah.
for sexual systems in plants, but there's still male and female systems. It's just there's different ways that those male and female systems are composed.
So, like, a hermaphrodite would be monoecious.
Yeah, monoecious and
Okay.
hermaphrodite are technically interchangeable. However, in plant biology, in botany, hermaphrodite has an even more specific meaning than
Oh,
monoecious.
Okay.
So monoecious specifically describes, like I said, a single plant that has a male flower and a female flower. But hermaphroditic plants, it's an individual plant that has what's called perfect flowers. They have male and female parts on the single flower
Oh.
on the same
And
plant.
see, that's what I feel like we learn about the most in biology class.
Mm-hmm.
It's like like in high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's more like the hermaphroditic.
The
plants.
hermaphroditic plants, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So that's detail that he didn't mention, and he also got those terms wrong. So we're off
Mm.
to a great start.
Yeah.
Let's keep going.
I'm probably going to use quite a few more terms throughout the video, but I'll try to explain those as I go along. I don't want to give you like a whole word bank here, so let's get started with the concept of what sex actually is. In biology, sex is not just the term for the act of reproduction through gene blending. It's also the term for how we characterize and categorize males versus females. And in the world of biology, your sex is determined by the size of your reproductive cells, which we call your gametes. If you have lots and lots of very small little gametes, we call those sperm and you're a boy. If you have relatively few very large gametes, we call those eggs and you're a girl. Now right away, you can notice that there's a pretty big problem here. What if you don't have any gametes? What if you're infertile? Does that mean that you're neither male nor female? The thing that you have to understand about biology is that all we're trying to do is define and calculate what nature is already doing all on its own. Life makes all the rules and breaks all the rules all the time. So as biologists, our job is to try to just carve out a hole for the peg that nature has already given us. And not everybody's going to fit into that slot. The point.
So first of all, at the beginning, he says that sex is determined by gametes. This is a fundamental error that he's doing. When he says determined, he's using the term wrong. What he means when he says determined is, I think, that's how we identify or observe sex, is by gametes. But in biology, the term determined has a specific developmental meaning, which means the trigger or the developmental decision that determines or that decides what path you'll go down. So whether your gonad will differentiate into male or a female, whether it's testes or ovaries, that is how sex is determined. That's the determination decision in development. And then as you develop, then you develop the internal and the external genitalia, and then we define your sex based on your reproductive system and how it relates to sperm or egg production. But he was saying that sex is determined by gametes. No, it's determined by genes in humans,
Yeah.
developed in the womb, and defined by the reproductive anatomy you develop.
Also, kind of bothered me that he's saying like it means you're a boy or a girl rather than saying male or female. Because one thing activists love doing is saying, no, boy, girl, man, woman are different than male, female, right? No one is conflating male, female with boy, girl, man, woman, is what they'll say, because gender is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was weird, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
Second of all, what age range is this video for? Because why would you be, I don't know, it feels condescending to be talking to like adults and being like, that means you're a boy, and like rather than
when these terms apply not only to obviously like every individual in humans, but across all these species. So, and we don't say that a male dog is a boy.
I mean, we do, but like
but
colloquially, it's not
the scientific term.
No, and if he's trying to be like all super sciencey and whatever in this video, which like shouldn't he be using male, female, because that's the overarching term? Like it feels weird for him not to be using that. I don't know. It feels kind of condescending. Like he's trying to make it for kids or something, or I don't know. It feels weird.
Let's also talk about the infertility fallacy that he brings up. He says that, well, what about people who are infertile? Well, my response is, if I define what an eye is, or we define what a kidney is, it has a certain function. If I then say, well, what about blind people? Well, that doesn't call into question what an eye is.
No.
It doesn't call into question the eye's existence or how it functions.
No.
It's just saying that, well, there's certain people where that function is not present. It's not functioning correctly.
And we know, like, this is how we can treat medical conditions. Again, I'm going to come back to this. This is how we can treat medical conditions that are treatable, that are fertility conditions, that are a condition where someone has lost their sight or what have you, because we know what the overall structure is, what the parts are, what goes into it, and how, like, with the technology that we have, we can restore that function.
Right. All biological systems have a structure and a function.
Right.
And just because that structure is maybe not functioning does not mean that the structure is not there. Doesn't mean that we can't define the structure.
Yeah.
And the same concept applies to sexes, to male and female. Males and females have specific reproductive structures involved in producing and releasing either gamete type. And just because it's not doing that at that time doesn't mean that they don't have the structures,
and
right?
we can see that on not just a level like, you know, with humans and organs and that kind of thing, but we can also see it on a micro level with cell structure and their functions.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's how cancer develops, is because the function of the cell is corrupted and it ends up like going bananas. And we can see that on a macro level with ecosystems and how they function, with the water cycle and how it functions. And when something's wrong with it, we can identify what it is and try to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, again, like, it's weird that he's trying to say that because something may not function properly, like as it should be functioning, like that means that, oh, nature just breaks the rules sometimes just because it feels like it. Like, it's not a rule that is broken intentionally or by design, or
it's not even a rule that's
fun.
broken.
Yeah.
It's just that the structure is not currently functioning.
Something went awry in that particular function, and it's not able to work the way it's supposed to. And like that can cause a lot of other issues because it's like a ripple effect. So it's really offensive and just ignorant to say like nature just breaks the rules. Like, come on, really?
How do we treat infertility? A male develops and he's infertile. He can't produce mature sperm. How do we know he's a male, first of all?
Yeah.
It's because he has the testes, which produce sperm.
Right.
And we can treat him potentially and see what's wrong inside those testes because we know what the function of testes are.
And how do we know what menopause is? How do we know what a menstrual cycle is? We only know that a menstrual cycle needs to happen in females because we know what a female is, because we know what the function of those structures are.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with menopause. Like, it's so bizarre to me that he's doing this. Oh gosh. And trying to act like he's doing it without offending anybody, and he's doing it for the benefit of people. because by erasing taxonomy, by turning taxonomy into Swiss cheese this way and putting holes in it and whatever, he's not helping anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And he's spreading misinformation, and he's acting like it's unimportant
Mm-hmm.
when it's extremely important. Like, if I see a snake, just telling me it's a snake is not going to help me. Like, do I know if it's a venomous snake? Do I know if it's endangered? Do I know, like, is it a snake that's more likely to bite or not? Like, this is why taxonomy matters and classification
Yeah.
like matters.
If you can't classify anything, you also can't treat any medical
Right.
problem. You just don't have the tools to do it.
Right.
So that's why I mentioned the fact of somebody who's infertile is because
Yeah.
you have to have those taxonomy tools to
Mhm.
actually treat people
Right.
and improve their lives and health and help their bodies function.
Like, who are you helping, Forrest, by saying, oh, well, you know what? Sometimes nature just breaks them rules and you're just infertile, and that's totally cool and fine, and there's
Nothing
don't
wrong.
do anything about it, and don't try to figure out why or if it affects any other systems in your body or whatever. Like, it's cool.
Here's another important
Like-
thing to mention, and an interesting way of thinking about it is that not every single person, like infants are not born with the ability to actually produce mature gametes.
Yeah.
That waits until puberty. Now, I know that females are born with all the eggs they will ever have, but they're not mature oocytes.
Right.
They take time to develop, and they don't become fully mature until singular ones are selected at puberty
Yeah.
to mature, right? So you can think of sexes, male and female, as like organs, but with long developmental times
Mhm.
before they begin functioning
Right.
with their evolved function of producing gametes.
Yeah. Well,
So-
humans are a system.
Yeah, otherwise we
So-
wouldn't be able to say this infant is a male or this infant is a
Right.
female. We're looking at the structures and how those structures then relate to gamete production over time. We know that if
Mhm.
you are born with a penis and testes, over your development, you're going to be able to produce sperm
Yeah.
at puberty if nothing goes wrong.
Yeah.
And that's why it's a developmental process. It's a life history strategy,
Yeah.
as one philosopher of biology puts it. And that's something that needs to be talked about and is important to understand.
Yeah, it's a system that's in development and that
Mhm.
has, again, this ripple effect, these events in your life based on your development and based on your age, which is why you can't identify as an age. I know he was like saying that that's like, oh, ludicrous to compare it, but it's a similar thing. Like, you can only function
Yeah.
in certain ways because your age determines like
Yeah.
when things kick into gear. So, yeah, like you develop these processes and things as you age
Mhm.
and as you grow and develop and mature.
Mhm.
All your organs grow with you and age with you. So, yeah, it's to say that any of it is just interchangeable or just like,
Mhm.
oh, just a throwaway thing.
Yeah.
Like, they act like your genitals and your organs, your reproductive system basically is this separate, detached, inconsequential thing, which again is also dangerous because in females and males, your reproductive organs do end up regulating a lot of other systems.
Yeah.
Like, especially in females. Like, we learned when we were studying the menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
Like, all of that contributes to bone health, organ health, mental health. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, the obfuscation of that can be really dangerous
it is dangerous.
and create medical misinformation
Yeah,
that those differences don't matter.
exactly.
And that's not true at all.
It's not true.
Okay, let's continue.
Is the definition of sex is not unique here. There is almost always some wiggle room, some gray area in almost every single biological definition of anything. It's one of the reasons I became a biologist, because life is weird as shit. So yeah, the fact that I just gave you an actual textbook
So,
definition and then immediately blew
I
a big
guess
hole in
him
it should give you a pretty good
cursing
idea of how the rest of this
shows
video
it's
is going
not
to
for
go.
kids.
Ignoring the
Yeah.
fact that an individual of a dioecious species might not have any gametes at all, the fact that we base sex on gamete size in the first place raises a lot of serious concerns. There are several species that are dioecious. They have males and females, but their gametes are all the same size.
Huge error here. Huge error. He's talking about isogamous species, species that do not have male and female sexes. They have what's called mating types, where these mating types produce gametes that are the same size. They don't produce sperm or eggs like males and females. They produce gametes that are the same size, same behavior, and they invest equal levels of resources into the offspring. Isogamy is a more ancient form of sexual reproduction that exists in fungi and algae, but it does not exist in most of the plant and animal kingdoms. And so to say that they're male and female sexes, no biologist worth their salt would ever define an isogamous species as having male and female sexes, or conflating mating types with sexes. In fact, the biology literature makes it very clear that mating types imply isogamy, same-size gametes, and sexes, male and female, imply anisogamy, differently sized gametes with different levels of contribution to the zygote.
So, again, this bothers me because he's obfuscating, like, again, by saying, oh, some species. He's not saying that it's fungus. He's not saying that it's algae.
Yeah, exactly. He hasn't described
He's saying
species.
some species. It could be kangaroos.
He might here, but I can't remember.
Like,
but we'll see. Yeah, let's keep going and
we'll
see.
They differentiate into what we call mating types, which you could call like male and female, but the only thing
you could not call them male and female. The biologists call them plus or minus, or give them different types of designations because they understand that male and female are defined by differently sized gametes, sperm and eggs.
More obfuscation.
Yes.
You'd be going off of there is who's giving and who's receiving the gametes. And if we tried to define everybody that way, then things like seahorses would have their sexes swapped because the females deposit the eggs into the males, and then the males fertilize them and give birth to live young.
Again, obfuscation. He's trying to make it seem like the biological definition of sex is arbitrary.
Yeah.
But in seahorses, it's not arbitrary. We can define them as male and female because we know that the male is the one who provides the sperm, the fertilizer. And the female is the one that provides the eggs.
He's trying
even
to,
in seahorses.
See, he's using the giving and receiving.
Giving and receiving, yeah. But we do not define sexes by giving and receiving. We define them as the contribution of the different type of gamete. And in seahorses, though the male does receive those eggs and then he fertilizes the eggs and he carries them in his pouch, basically. Right. You can kind of think of it almost like a kangaroo in a way.
Yeah.
But he then releases those after they're developed, but he still is the one that provides the sperm. And that's what makes him male. That's what makes him male just like any other male, is that across all those species, that they're defined by the one that provides the sperm. And that's what he doesn't describe here. He tries to make it seem like it's arbitrary, but it's absolutely not arbitrary, as any biologist would tell you.
Also, there are a few species that have more than just two gamete sizes. For example, there's one species of fruit fly that has one size of egg and then 3 different sizes of sperm, each produced by a different type of male. So we should really be saying that there are 4 different sexes here, or at the very least we could say that there's 2 sexes, but one of them is broken down into 3 subclasses of male, one of which violates the whole definition of sex anyway because their sperm is actually bigger than the female's egg.
Okay. 2 things. He packs in a lot there. He tries to make it seem like the definition of sex is arbitrary. So first of all, he is taking the gamete size definition way too literally. Like, the gamete size definition is a shorthand for what the 2 different reproductive functions represent. Okay? So sperm tends to be really small and motile. It can move fast. And it is often produced in large numbers. And that's because it provides little to no resources to the zygote. It's basically like a missile or care package that goes into the egg and provides the other half of that genetic material. Whereas the egg is often larger because it has to have all those resources for the zygote. And it's not the size difference itself that defines the sexes. It's what those size differences represent. Those 2 different roles in reproduction.
Further, I do want to clarify with this particular gnat when he's talking about the size of the gamete. This particular gnat, it's not that the sperm, like the little head of the sperm, is bigger than the egg. It's that the tail is just really, really long.
Yeah.
So that's what he means. It's
So it's not that,
actually that it's
yeah.
like this huge sperm coming for the egg. Like,
Yeah.
no, it just has a really long tail. But he sees that as like, oh, it's so much bigger. No.
Yeah, it's the egg is still bigger in volume by
Yeah.
far because it holds more of those, much more of the resources
Mhm.
for the zygote. Whereas that sperm, it's still really small in the head, but it is, yeah, super
Yeah.
long. In fact, it's 20 times longer than the fruit fly's body.
Yeah.
That would be like a human sperm being, 20 times longer than a human male.
Right.
It's
But
crazy
the head's
long.
still really tiny. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what happens is they actually, when they ejaculate the sperm, it's actually wound up in a ball. When it goes into the female's reproductive tract, it unwinds and unravels. And one reason for that is actually sperm competition. That in this species of fruit fly, a healthier male is one who has longer sperm. And the longer sperm competes with the other sperm, and usually the longer one wins out. And so that is one reason why that fruit fly has such long sperm. But again, we can still define the males in that species by the fact that they contribute the sperm.
Right.
It doesn't matter that there's 3 different sizes of sperm. They're all sperm.
Yeah.
They all contribute the same way. And they're all
So-
males that way. So you can't say that there's 4 sexes because the sexes are defined by the
Right.
2 different gametes.
And you can't really say that it's a subclass because that would be like, oh, well, this in humans, this person tends to, or this group of people, this culture has, shorter legs than humans in other cultures. So they're actually a subspecies.
Right.
Like,
A subspecies
Yeah.
of, yeah, human,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. So,
That doesn't work, yeah.
yeah. And
Again, we are not defining sexes by like what the traits look like. We're defining it by function.
mhm,
That's why we can say that even though there's 3 different sizes of sperm,
right.
they all have the exact same evolved function of fertilizing the female's egg.
Mhm.
That's why they're males. That's why it's sperm.
Right. So unless Forrest wants to get into eugenics territory, then
Yeah,
I
seriously,
don't
it's
think he wants to start making subclassification arguments. Like,
yeah, that because then you could do this argument to an infinite degree.
yeah,
You could divide everything up based on just the traits and what it looks like, and saying that
Mhm.
this is a new category of thing completely just because it
Right.
has a difference in this trait.
yeah, just because it like looks different or it's
Yeah.
a different size.
And it's a really superficial understanding of biology. It's not understanding functions. It's just, oh, what does this thing look like? Okay, that's different. Like, no, that's not how it works.
He looks so personally offended in this.
He does
still.
look really offended. Yeah.
Which I want to pause for a second and say, like, yes, I make faces throughout his video, but it's because he is so condescending. Like his
He is
video
very
and
condescending,
very
yeah.
like just arrogant, and I
He
don't
comes across as though
yeah.
he has all this complex information that
yeah,
nobody else understands, and that he's like
Right.
the savior to provide it all, and you gotta listen
yeah.
to him, and yeah, it's just
And
not.
I don't take kindly to people arrogantly misrepresenting information, especially when it comes to things like biological sex, because I have so many friends and things like that that have DSDs, and it's, or even like infertility and things like that, like it is extremely offensive in my
Mhm.
opinion. So to see somebody with this level of arrogance do that, I'm sorry, but I don't respect you, and I'm gonna make faces when you make stupid claims and when you're being an arrogant jerk. So yeah,
Yeah.
I just want to clarify in case anybody like wants to accuse me of being in bad faith.
This is-
No, I'm listening and I'm being respectful in what I'm saying, but I don't have to keep my expression. I would make the same expressions if he were saying this to me in
Yeah.
person too. Like, sure, okay.
This is the same standard that you'll see with other people talking about the sex spectrum that
Yeah.
are presenting that. they're often very condescending, and they act like they have all this new amazing information that you didn't know in high school biology, so we're going to teach you a lesson, that kind of thing. And it is really condescending.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to educate and really teach people the depth of knowledge at all.
And if you are going to be that condescending to people who, like, that's as far as their education went or whatever, like, everybody's trying to understand. So when you're being like a pompous, arrogant jerk about it, like, especially when you're incorrect about so many things, it's incredibly offensive. And, like, I don't have to be super sweet about it. So.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Let's see what he says next.
By the way, in case you were curious, here's some bonus vocab words for you. The term for when a species has more than one size of gamete is anisogamy. The term for having just one size of gamete is isogamy. So if you wanted to sound all smart and important, you could say that humans are a dioecious, anisogametic, and moderately sexually dimorphic species of primates. Also,
so it's anisogamy and isogamy. And anisogamy is the definition for species that have male and female sexes, whether those sexes are defined in one individual, whether they're composed in separate individuals like humans. We're anisogamous, so he's correct about that. He says we're dioecious, and you can use that term for animals, but technically it's a plant term for, as we said before, a male plant and a female plant in separate individuals.
Yeah.
In humans, if you want to use a term for dioecious, it's actually gonochoric or gonochorism. And that is a specific term that applies to animals, just animals. And that is where individuals are either male or female through their entire life cycle. And so we are an anisogamous species. Humans are gonochoric. We have male and female in separate individuals. We cannot change our sex. And
so if you want to actually sound smart, don't say what Forrest said, because it's not really accurate.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we are moderately dimorphic. He is right about that. We don't have extreme difference between male and female bodies compared to other species in humans. But that doesn't mean that there are no differences.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that male and female cannot be defined. It's something that people conflate a lot. We're different.
Very different in our bodies, but just not as extreme.
Yeah.
As some other
Yeah,
species.
you can take like spiders. There's some spiders often where the males are tiny and the females
like
are huge.
Black widow, for example.
And that's something people conflate a lot, is they'll say that sex is a spectrum because there's that variation in dimorphism. But dimorphism describes the extent of the difference between male and female in a given species, whereas binary just describes that there's two sexes in a species.
Right.
It doesn't say like how dimorphic they are. So to have dimorphism, you first have to have the binary. It has to be binary male and female, and then dimorphism as the layer above that.
Yeah.
How different are they in body and behavior?
And we don't have sub-females
Yes.
that are different heights
Yes.
or muscle density or whatever.
Type
Same
A
thing with,
female, type B female. Yeah.
Same thing
we
with
don't
males.
have that.
No.
And I'm sure there's slight variation in the actual literal size of the female's eggs across different individuals.
Probably. There's different
like very
size
small
in the
differences.
vaginal canal.
Yeah.
Like with penis.
So there's going to be
size.
variation, but again, we have to understand variation in relationship to actually like how those systems function.
Yeah.
Even though those eggs might be different sizes, they all have the same function, right? So yeah, that's an important thing. Okay, we can move to the next part.
Well, even with males, like that's part of what goes into fertility treatment for males, is measuring like the size of the
size or the
tails
motility,
and the size of the heads and things like that. So and we don't have subspecies of human males based on on or subsexes of males based on that. No, we don't.
Then you'd have to just create an infinite subcategory system.
Yeah.
It would never end.
The whole idea that you're just born male or female and that we should just go with what's on your birth certificate is deeply flawed, to say the least.
This is a big one. So, yeah. So, more than about 99.99% of births, you can accurately predict sex just by looking at the external genitalia alone. Just that marker gives you an accurate marker of the baby's sex. And there's really very rare cases, about 1 in 5,000 births, that might have genitalia that looks ambiguous, but after additional screening their gonadal tissue, screening their internal genitalia, doing a genetic screening, they can put those traits together and see, oh, they developed down the male path or they developed down the female path. And so to say that the idea that we're born male or female is deeply flawed, how can you say that as a biologist?
Well, I mean, he's right to the extent that it doesn't happen when you're born, because I'm pregnant now, Forrest, and they know my baby's female. So they were able to see that already, and she hasn't been born. So, yeah. Is that a wedding ring? Like, someone actually married this man?
Can't tell. Maybe.
Sorry. I can't imagine. Like, what is his definition of marriage? Is that fixed? Like, I mean, just when you're gonna say something like that, like make a claim that's that profoundly like wrong and stupid, like I can't imagine what else he misrepresents in his day-to-day life. Like I really can't. I really cannot imagine what kind of person he is normally. Like,
I can't believe he made that claim.
wow. And again, with such confidence. And that
we have done what's called karyotype studies, where we study the chromosomal makeup of infants and we look at their body to see if it matches what's with their chromosomes. And we have found through the studies of tens of thousands of newborns that, going back decades, that in 99.99% of births, the chromosomes match the genitalia and match the phenotype, and that there's no ambiguity at all. And so to say that we're not born male or female, that's just insane.
like again, it is deeply flawed. Like, no, it is not deeply flawed. Like, again, this is where he is misusing language and just obfuscate. It's not even obfuscate. It's a complete misrepresentation, a lie.
Yeah, it's just a lie.
Like,
it really is.
When something is deeply flawed, it means there is a huge error, like a huge categorical error that needs to be rectified. Okay? Like, this is not that. We classify sex and we observe it and we record it. That's what's happening. To say that what is happening when that occurs is deeply flawed, like, really, like, oh my gosh, like, what else does he think is deeply flawed? Like, medical treatments, oxygen, like, I mean, really, like, there are systems in medicine that depend on understanding biological sex from, like, while your baby is still in the womb. Sometimes that comes into play. Like, I just
let's see what he says about why it's deeply flawed, if anything.
There are several species that are completely hermaphroditic, making both sperm and eggs. There are several species that are sequentially hermaphroditic. They start out as either male or female, and then later on in life they switch.
So what does that have to do with
what does that have to do with humans?
Sex being deeply flawed? Like, babe, that's not the same thing. Like, please. Like,
so let's clarify that.
Gosh.
So he said the idea that we as humans are born male or female is deeply flawed. And then he suddenly goes to other species that have hermaphrodites or sequential hermaphrodites. Now, first of all,
like, that's deeply flawed. What he just did is
that's
deeply
absolutely
flawed.
Deeply flawed.
To say that the recording of sex on your birth certificate, it based on, like, how we classify sex and everything, is deeply flawed, and then jump to, like, hermaphrodites and other species. That's deeply flawed, buckaroo. Okay, like, don't. Oh my
we
God.
can still define male and female in those species because they have male and female roles. It's just that they're
Yeah.
composed in different ways.
Yes.
The simultaneous hermaphrodites, like in slugs, they have male and female in one individual, two
Right.
sexes in one. The clownfish or the sequential hermaphrodites that change sex, we know whether one is male or female depending on what gamete type they're producing. It's producing sperm or eggs, what role they're fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
They can switch between them depending on environmental circumstances,
Right.
but that does not mean that male and female are undefinable.
No,
We
like
can
that's
the only
how
reason
we
we can
can
define
yes.
them as changing sex is because we know what male and female are in the first place. Now, when it
Like,
comes to humans, no human is a hermaphrodite.
no.
You'll see in the medical literature that they often use the term hermaphrodite or have in the past for humans with rare developmental disorders, but that is a misnomer.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to 2005, there was a call to abandon the word hermaphrodite applied to humans because it's clinically problematic and scientifically specious. It doesn't have scientific footing.
Right.
A hermaphrodite, by definition, is an animal that can reproduce as both male and female. It has both systems
Mm-hmm.
together in one. It's a species strategy.
Yeah.
Humans don't have that species strategy at all.
No.
And to call a human with a developmental disorder a hermaphrodite is a pejorative, it's ignorant, it doesn't help the actual patient get medical care, it doesn't describe
No.
their actual condition. And so that word should be abandoned completely.
Yeah. And it's because of, like, this is why the spread of this kind of misinformation and crap that he's doing is so offensive and, like, detrimental, is because I have a friend with Klinefelter's whose, we talked about this in our last video, whose doctor said that, oh, he didn't actually need his medical treatment, his testosterone and whatever to survive. He actually could just stop taking it and
That he just needed to
choose,
accept his gender
yeah,
identity.
just choose to accept his gender identity as, like, a lesser male, I guess. I don't really know what this doctor was suggesting was supposed to be his gender identity. Like,
So that idea that there is nothing considered healthy development, that any
right,
development is just okay and healthy and normal,
right.
that's really dangerous. It's really
Yes.
dangerous, yeah.
Like, he needed this testosterone treatment to live. Like, it's not like when trans people say, oh, I need the hormones because if not, I will, unalive, or whatever term YouTube determines is okay to use here. But it's not the same. Like, this is an actual condition that if he did not get this testosterone, his body would shut down and he would die. And it was very painful and uncomfortable and everything for him. So this is why I cannot stand the like what Forrest is doing.
Yeah.
And I can't stand what other activists are doing because it's affecting real people with real health conditions. It's affecting women and like just, yeah, like our healthcare as females is already so lacking and it's already so misunderstood. Like, most people just accept that, oh, just, take birth control for endometriosis or PCOS or whatever, not understanding that that doesn't fix the problem and that it can lead to other problems and that just stopping a period is not healthy. Like, stopping your menstrual cycle is not healthy. Like, it can impact your bones and all kinds of other systems. So, yeah, like, just that kind of rhetoric is taking us backwards in healthcare. It's not helping anybody. It's not progressive. It's not progress. It's not healthy. It's not helpful. It's not kind. It's not inclusive. Like, the only people this helps, Forrest, are healthy people that don't have any health issues or whatever relating to their reproductive health or like any kind of DSD or anything like that. That's the only people that what you're doing helps.
It doesn't even help them because
right.
it doesn't provide accurate information.
Right. But it makes them
spreading
feel real
lies to them.
special. Makes them feel real special and confident, I guess. I don't know, on TikTok or something. That's it. That's the only people. But up ahead, if they were to have an issue with their reproductive health or what have you, like, and you've done all your damage. Is it going to help them? No, they're going to have a complete misunderstanding. They're not going to know like what to look for, or if they should look for it, or if something's a problem.
They might
Like,
think that if they're born with, let's say, they find out that they're born with an extra chromosome that causes a chromosomal disorder, they might think that that's just normal and healthy.
yeah,
That's a
nature
normal
just
part
broke
of
the rules.
human variation, and that it doesn't need to be treated.
Right.
When in actuality, it does need to be treated on a medical level to actually improve their health and well-being.
Right.
It doesn't mean that the person is disordered, which they
No.
often use a straw man in that way,
Right.
but it just means that they have a disorder, and
Right.
that it is helpful and important to treat that disorder
Yes.
in any way that they can in a safe and effective way.
Right. And this kind of thinking is so regressive and so harmful, and he's just trying to make it cute. And it's like, it's not
Mhm.
cute. It's not cute. It's really not cute, Forrest. Just like your PFP on Twitter is not cute. It's weird.
So he was saying about conflating hermaphroditic species with humans.
Yeah.
So we left off there. Let's see what he says next.
There are plenty of species that can be one sex their entire lives, and then when it comes time to breed, if they can't find the opposite sex around, they just switch to the opposite sex to help everybody else out. There are even some animals that we call bilateral gonadromorphs that are literally male on one half of their body and female on the other half. You can even have
He acts like that's the standard for those animals, and
It's a
not.
very, very rare genetic disorder, often leaving those animals infertile.
Yeah, so they can't.
And it can
even-
only happen in insects and birds and other types of animals like that that have a chromosomal divide in their phenotype, where half their body is like XX, the other half is XY. And
Sorry, it's face right now.
yeah, his face. But yeah, so first of all, genetic disorders. Second of all, even if they were not genetic disorders, even if they were more commonplace, it doesn't mean that male and female are arbitrary.
Just
It means they have a male
Yeah.
half and a female half, and we
Yeah.
define that by the phenotype, the body structure that is involved in producing sperm or involved in producing eggs.
Yeah.
It's pretty simple, ultimately, when you understand that universal definition.
Yeah. He's acting like these creatures are the rebus, which in alchemy is like a perfect union of male and female. It's like both embodied in the same thing. They work perfectly and have like no issues. And like, no, that's not what they are.
Yeah, those species like insects or those birds, those species that he's talking about with the gonadromorphs, they are gonochoric species. They're either male or female on a species strategy. They don't have hermaphrodites as a species strategy.
No.
And whereas the rebus, and that
Yeah.
is a hermaphrodite, they're a true hermaphrodite.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's the difference.
Yeah. That's what they do. They act like it's this magical, like,
Right. They can reproduce as
all
both,
the
that they have
time.
both systems, but they
Yeah.
don't.
No.
In fact, they usually just have one system
Yeah.
or a partial vestigial secondary system that doesn't work.
Yeah. And you know what? I wonder like what he would say applied with gender identity to a rebus.
Yeah.
Like again, this whole identity argument really doesn't apply to anything else. So while he's saying humans aren't special, like at the same time that's his entire platform is humans are special because we can be trans. Like just so contradictory all the time.
have that whole setup just in your gonads. Ovotestes are when you have ovarian tissue on one side and testicular tissue on the other side of the same organ. That happens sometimes in humans and other animals, and there are even some species where that's the normal ground state of all females.
So he's talking about ovotestes, which is a rare genetic disorder in humans, and there have only been about 500 cases reported in the medical literature. Now, this can affect females and it can affect males. It's when you have a mix of ovarian and testicular tissue inside your body during development. And there are many, many different causes, many different genetic causes. It depends on the individual. Sometimes a gene might be translocated onto another chromosome. So a male-making gene might be upregulated and make testes tissue inside the ovarian tissue, or vice versa. And what they find is that these people who develop this disorder, they develop one main reproductive system with vestigial elements of a secondary system. And when they are fertile, usually it's only the ovarian tissue that's functional. There have only been 3 cases of sperm production or of males with this condition fathering children. And there has not been a documented case where a person develops both systems completely and fulfills both reproductive roles.
And in ovotestes, otherwise, aren't they referred to as streak gonads?
That's something else. So
Okay.
a streak gonad is a gonad that has not differentiated at all
Okay.
due to a genetic disorder. So the clusters of cells just become like clumps that don't differentiate into testes or ovaries. They just stay kind of undifferentiated.
Okay. And so with ovotestes, though, don't they have to remove some of the tissue? Otherwise, it can become cancerous?
There is a higher cancer
Yeah.
risk with ovotestes because of that competing tissue and the mutations involved.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not, just a fun fact.
Almost all of those
Like-
people who develop that disorder are infertile, and it greatly impacts their hormone system, their internal genitalia. I mean, it
Yeah.
is a life-altering, oftentimes traumatic
So-
experience.
Again, to act like this is just something that just happens and it's just not a problem and it's fine and it's just like these species who are like the rebus or just halfsy. Like, no.
Yep.
Like,
He also conflates it here with like a species strategy, like an
Yeah.
evolved strategy.
Right.
And this is not an evolved strategy.
No.
It's a genetic disorder, and to conflate those two is not not, what am I trying to say? Not appropriate or not healthy. Not
Right.
not best practice when discussing medical
and
conditions.
the other thing too is because he is spreading this misinformation, like if someone were to meet someone with one of these DSDs or something like in the wild, like in the city somewhere, and they were to just be like, I know all about your disorder. I heard it in a Forrest Valkai video. And they like say some of this stuff to them. I can't like,
Or think they're not
Yeah.
male or female and treat them
Yeah,
as though they're
like,
like this hermaphrodite.
how dehumanizing and how offensive. Like now you have completely like ruined social interaction for these people when they do talk about their DSD to someone and the other person is totally misinformed and thinks that they are some magical like sex unicorn that just nature just broke the rules on and it's all fine. They don't have any problems, whatever. Like no.
Yep. Our systems, which I think we'll get into later, but our sex development reproductive systems in humans, they're mutually antagonistic. So like as one system develops, it inhibits the
Yeah.
opposite sex system. And our species is not designed or
Right.
evolved to have
Or, you
those
know,
systems in the same individual.
like with our friend and his doctor, like that doctor just being a complete idiot when it came to this stuff, probably heard some similar rhetoric to what Forrest is saying, and then put his patient in danger. Thank goodness that our friend knew enough about his own condition to not listen to this quack doctor, but not everybody's going to be in that boat. So like he's putting people in danger by spreading this stuff, and I really hope, I implore you, Forrest, to stop doing this because it's very dangerous. It's extremely dangerous and it's so offensive. Like please stop. You're hurting people, bud. Like you are. I really want to believe you're not a bad person and you don't want to hurt people. So please don't do that.
Let's continue and see what he says next.
So gonadal differences aren't enough to actually differentiate between the two sexes. But I know what you're thinking, right? You're thinking, hey, just look at the chromosomes. After all, you're either XX or XY, right? Not exactly. The concept of how sex is determined in an organism is usually broken down like this. You have your chromosomes, those code for what kind of gonads you get, either ovaries or testes, and then those produce germ cells and hormones, and that's how we tell whether you're a boy or a girl.
So it's not the chromosomes that encode the testes or ovaries. It's the genes inside the chromosomes that encode, that determine testes versus ovaries, which is the primary sex determination. And let's continue.
And if you go to any high school level biology class, that's
There it is.
probably the explanation that you're going to get. Problem is, that's wildly inaccurate.
How is that wildly inaccurate? That
I don't know, which again, I'm going to say, what else does this man say these things about in his day-to-day life? Like,
that the chromosomes and the genes inside them encode the gonadal tissue to differentiate into either testes or ovaries, and then those gonads produce hormones which organize the internal genitalia
yeah.
and the external genitalia, and then the germ cells, which are the basically immature gametes, the immature sperm or eggs, they are grown inside the gonads. That is what happens in human sex development.
Yeah.
How can he say that that is, again, like deeply flawed
Yeah.
and that it's not true?
I'm just like thinking, does this man get like his mortgage payment in the mail? And he's like, you know what?
This is deeply flawed.
Yeah, this is deeply flawed. That's wildly inaccurate. I'm just not paying this because you know what? My mortgage payment is a spectrum.
What you learned about math in high school biology,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
not true.
This accountant clearly didn't get past high school math. Like, no, not happening. Like, oh my God.
Yeah, it's the same kind of strategy he's using here.
Is it just that he's so wound up with like identity politics or something that he just like applies it to everything? Like, that's not how reality works. Like,
No.
and he's already given incorrect definitions and things.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitions aren't just what you want them to be. Like, those things exist whether you apply the label to them or not.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just kind of crazy to me that he's.
And if you want to read about how sex development works in humans, you can go to any major biology textbook or developmental biology textbook, or even better, human embryology. And they will discuss in detail those steps, just like I discussed. And they'll show you what that standard healthy development is and how it works.
Yeah.
And it's not deeply flawed. It's just how it works.
Yeah.
So.
And it leaves a lot of stuff out. First of all, the sex of an embryo is evident well before gonads ever develop. In fact, there are plenty of species where external genitalia develop before gonads ever do. There are also plenty of chromosomal sex differences that have nothing to do with genitalia or gonads or any of that, and therefore don't fall into that whole biological gamete size sex determining model, but are still very important.
So, first of all, how does he know what sex is which at the beginning, like he was saying? He keeps when he's talking about this, he keeps accidentally like slipping and revealing that he knows what male and female are.
Suddenly he knows. Okay.
Going back and forth between
not male
this
and
is
female,
arbitrary.
boys and girls.
Yeah. It's this going back and forth between male and female are arbitrary to, oh, we know what sex this is versus this sex. Like, okay, it's really contradictory.
Right.
He also said that there's plenty of sex chromosomal differences that exist before the gonads differentiate. And that's true because males are almost always given a Y chromosome and have one X in humans. And then in human females, it's XX. And there are genetic differences there that express themselves in the tissues before the gonads differentiate. But here's the thing. We do not define male and female by chromosomes.
Right.
We define them by the reproductive system they develop in relationship to sperm or eggs. And to have him for him to say that there's these chromosomal differences before the gonads develop, so it's like we don't define it by the gonad gamete type. That's not true at all. We do define sexes by gonad/gamete type. The gonad is the organizer that produces the gametes. It's inextricably tied to what sex is.
You can't produce sperm from an ovary.
Yeah, and you cannot produce sperm from an X chromosome.
Yeah.
Or like the chromosome does not produce the gametes.
Right.
The gonads produce the
Right.
gametes. And that's how we define sexes across all these species, even species that don't have sex chromosomes. There's plenty of species that don't have X and Y like humans, and yet they still develop into males or females because they develop testes or ovaries and they produce sperm or eggs, right? So it's that universal definition that's so important, but he is saying that it's arbitrary because of the chromosome differences. I don't get that. So,
Yeah. This man.
and I thought that
He's just
XX and
wild.
XY were not accurate, like you said, for determining sex.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Yeah.
very contradictory.
He keeps running around circles.
Okay, let's keep going.
For example, the human Y chromosome contains instructions for a special kind of ribosome, which is the part of the cell that builds proteins. So protein synthesis is just very slightly different in me than it is for any female, and it has been since well before I had any hint of a gender. Perhaps you have heard that we are all females by default, and then it's the Y chromosome that makes me into a boy. That ain't true either. It is true to say that one particular gene on the Y chromosome, what we call SRY, plays a pretty important role in the development of testes and therefore by extension male behavior.
So it's true that we don't all begin as female.
Right.
We all begin as male or female determined by our genetic profile at conception, and then our body develops around the 6th week or 7th week down the male or female pathway
Yeah.
based on sex-determining genes like SRY, which he mentioned there. And SRY determines male sex by differentiating the gonad into testes,
Mm-hmm.
whereas other genes absent of SRY will upregulate ovaries and develop a female. But yeah, we don't start out as female.
No.
We start out as male or female.
Yeah.
But how can he say
Yeah.
that if the categories don't mean anything?
I also love how he just threw in gender, like.
Right. He's been talking about sex this whole time, but then
Right.
is he conflating now gender and sex? Is he using a different
Is he
meaning for gender? We don't know. He hasn't defined it. He just used it right here, but has not
like,
defined it.
because didn't he say any concept of a gender?
Yeah.
So at what age do you conceptualize your gender?
What is gender
And
in the first
yeah,
place? Like in his
and
mind.
yeah, and like
Yeah.
doesn't again that make it seem like it's just something in your head that you came up with rather than like something you developed that is meaningful to your
Yeah.
body and like life.
Yeah.
So
So now he's going to go on to describe more of the
like,
genes.
there's just more rampant transphobia from Forrest Valkai.
Creating category differences.
Well, no,
Upholding
like just
category.
saying gender is a
Oh,
concept.
okay. Yeah.
I can't remember if he said conceptualize, but
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he did.
So now he's going to talk about more sex-determining genes.
Mm.
So, for example, when the SRY gene was spliced into XX female mice, about 30% of them developed male testes, male genitalia, and even male behaviors. Similarly, when the SRY gene was cut,
He was talking about XX mice. So experiments in XX and XY mice where the researchers take that male sex-determining gene, SRY, and they translocate it onto an XX fetus. And what happens is because it has that make male genetic information, it makes a male. It turns the bipotential gonads into testes, and they develop a penis and all the male genitalia.
I would really love it if we stopped experimenting on animals. I
Yeah.
know that we have to in a lot of cases, but in this kind of situation, it feels particularly like unnecessary.
Yeah.
Like,
You could argue that it's important for fertility research and trying to
Yeah.
understand how to treat reproductive conditions. But yeah, there's a big part of it that is really, really not humane because it is causing
Yeah.
disorders in these animals that
mhm.
otherwise they wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So it's a, yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's a necessary evil in some situations. I just don't like
Yeah.
it.
No, it's not fun.
But also, I think it's funny that he's leaving out a big one that he could like claim is the ducks. Ducks can change their sex with females anyway
Hmm.
if they're
Explain
ovary.
that more.
Okay, so in ducks, which I learned from someone on Twitter actually who explained this to me, and then I looked it up and I was like, what? Ducks, the females can change their sex into males if their ovary is damaged because they only have one ovary. And if that ovary is damaged, then they develop into a male that can produce sperm. Their feathers and body and everything actually change into like male plumage and all that stuff. Like even their tail feathers will curve. And yeah, they can mother, like be the mother to ducklings and then later father ducklings.
So they basically have a genetic program that tells the ovaries, okay, you're not functioning properly anymore.
Right.
We need to upregulate male genes
Yeah.
that transforms the ovaries into testes.
Yes. Which is crazy.
That has not been documented in any human.
No.
That is specifically
Yeah.
a special thing that
Well, we know
exists
that,
in ducks.
we know that if a female doesn't have ovaries, like a
Yes.
female human, or her ovaries are damaged or whatever, she goes into menopause. It's not
Yes.
something that...
Now, if we find a human who somehow miraculously degenerates their ovaries and their female
Yeah.
system and then develops testes and a
Mhm.
male system, that would be a sex change. But we've
Yeah.
never seen that ever observed in
No.
humans.
And again, something that could only happen in females.
Mm-hmm.
So we
And
have
female
to
ducks.
know that they
Yeah.
were female first and then became male.
Yep.
Like, it's not the case
Yep.
where a male duck can become a female duck.
Yep.
So, at least as far as I know. Like,
So here he's talking about XX mice, and this just shows the importance of sex-determining genes for developing you as a male or female.
mhm.
You're moving around that important genetic information,
Right.
and of course that XX mice is going to develop as male now that it has
Right.
male-making genes like SRY.
Which
It doesn't call into
yeah.
question what male and female are. It reveals the genetic mechanisms that
Yeah.
control male or female development. So let's continue.
Out of XY male mice, many of them went on to develop ovaries, to develop feminine behaviors.
Let me rewind it just a few seconds.
X female mice, about 30% of them developed male testes, male genitalia, and even male behaviors. Similarly, when the SRY gene was cut out of XY male mice, many of them went on to develop ovaries, to develop feminine behaviors, and even to be able to get pregnant and have litters.
So this is the opposite. This is XY females, where you take out the SRY gene in a zygote, in an embryo, and that a mouse embryo develops as a female. They develop ovaries, they develop a female reproductive system, and that's how they're able to actually ovulate, gestate, and give birth, right? It's because they don't have the male-making genes, and so the female-making genes are upregulated in their absence. And that reveals that ovarian development is an active process, just
Yeah.
like testes development. You need certain genes for ovarian development, just like you need certain genes for testes development. And it's about this mutually antagonistic, back and forth system.
Right.
And that's what these experiments reveal. And also one more thing. So, how do they develop eggs? They have
Yeah.
XY. What we learned back in the 90s with studies on mice is that the germ cells, the cells that will become sperm or eggs, they don't originate in the gonad. They actually travel from outside the gonad and into the gonad, and it is there where they are fashioned into either sperm or eggs. Now that fashioning of transforming that raw material into sperm or eggs, that is controlled by the gonadal tissue environment, not the chromosomes. That is how they're able to develop eggs in an XY mouse, is because the XY female mouse developed ovaries, and that ovarian tissue acted as like the assembly line or the factory that then shaped that raw material of those germ cells into eggs.
Mhm.
And so that shows us that the chromosomes alone do not determine the development of the germ cells. The germ cells become sperm or eggs based on whether they're in testes or ovaries. So that's something really cool. But it shows you that, again, when it comes to sex, the important thing is that gonad gamete type, because the gonads organize the gametes, produce the gametes, and then organize the internal and external genitalia.
Right. It reinforces the differences even at
Yep.
like a chromosomal and genetic level. So it's just weird that he's trying to use it as like a deconstruction thing.
Yeah, because he's saying that we can still
Yeah.
define that mouse as female, even though she has XY chromosomes,
Yeah.
because she gestated, ovulated, and gave birth, right?
Yeah.
And so he's reinforcing the difference
Yeah.
by explaining that they're a female mouse. How do we know they're female? Right?
Yes.
So that reveals the two different roles that he's trying to obfuscate.
Yeah. Oh man.
Again, Those are XY male mice getting pregnant and giving birth. But don't
You cannot call them male.
No.
They're defined as female.
I love how he's
Because-
like, they're male mice that gave birth. And it's like, babe, no, they are female mice that are XY female. Like, they just have the chromosomes and the genes like moved around. But because they developed female organs, they are female. Like, those reproductive structures are female. Like, they're not male mice anymore.
Yep. There's even species of rat that lost its Y chromosome.
Yeah.
But how do they make males? It's because they have genes on other chromosomes that upregulate the male making genes
No.
and produce males,
You don't
even without a
say.
Y chromosome. Yep.
Like, and this goes back to the duck thing. Forrest, the duck goes from being a female to a male. Why? Because she lost her ovary and developed the testes and like became a male duck. Like,
Yep.
this is how we know what sequential hermaphrodites are. Like,
Yes.
this is so, oh my god.
Let's keep going. Let's try.
let any of this fool you into thinking that like the SRY gene is some magical on-off switch to masculinity. The truth is way weirder and way cooler than that. For example,
First of all, the SRY gene is considered by researchers as the master switch sex-determining gene for mammals. This
Is
goes
that
back
why
into
he
the
said
90s. And well, he wanted to say that it's not the whole story, but it's the major master regulator for male sex determination. There are cases where males can develop without it, but it's really rare genetic disorders. The SRY gene is that important master regulator, and you'll find that in the literature. But he's saying that it's not the whole story, which of course if you're trying to understand all the genes involved, it's not the whole story, but it's the foundation and the start.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. I love this freeze frame.
Yeah.
there was one cool study done back in the 1980s that showed that like female wallabies with XX chromosomes that didn't have any egg cells at birth actually developed testes and went on to be more or less males even without the SRY gene. And you know why? It's because everyone has the genes for both testes and ovaries. What?
Okay. So he's saying that these female wallabies had damaged ovaries, kind of like the ducks, and they
Yeah.
developed testes. We don't know if that's the same mechanism, but I looked at his references for the wallabies, and I could not find the location of that specific claim. I saw research on XXY wallabies and X wallabies, so wallabies with Turner syndrome, which is just 45X, and then wallabies with Klinefelter syndrome, which is 47XXY. And they found that there's certain developmental issues that happen in these chromosomal disorders in wallabies, where, for example, in female marsupials who have Turner syndrome, a pouch does not develop, and they develop an empty scrotum, despite internal ovaries. And so what they found was that 2 X chromosomes are required for the development of a pouch in the wallaby.
Okay.
Whereas if they're missing an X chromosome, they develop a scrotum, even though there's no testes there. And that's because the development of a scrotum versus a pouch is determined by the number of X chromosomes. So that was an interesting study that they found, but they're still defined as male or female based on the
Yeah.
gonads and the gamete type.
So is he now saying that the scrotum made them more or less male?
I don't know, it's unclear. He didn't talk about the specific study. He didn't mention what it was, so
Now he's trying to argue that the presence of like certain things will make you one sex.
Yeah.
The presence of something. But isn't that contrary to what he said before? I shouldn't be surprised. Oh my
yeah,
God.
wasn't he saying that the male and female categories aren't actually real or arbitrary? Also in wallabies, there's studies where they will administer hormones to see how it impacts their sex.
Mhm.
And they do this at a critical period where the embryo is growing in the pouch. and they're really susceptible during that time to hormonal influence.
Yeah.
And so they've given female wallabies testosterone and male wallabies estrogen while they're developing in the pouch.
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is it can cause what's called sex reversal, where a female wallaby developing, when their gonads start to develop, because of the administration of testosterone, they'll develop testes. And because of the administration of estrogen in the genetic male wallaby, they'll develop ovaries. And so they'll have what's called that sex reversal, which means their gonads are developing opposite of what you would expect from the chromosomes. That still makes them male or female based on the gonads, even though they have chromosomes you wouldn't expect. But that just shows that you can impact sex development in wallabies and have a sex reversal during a critical window.
Yeah.
You cannot change their sex after they're born.
Again, it's just, I don't want an experiment on animal babies. I don't like
I know, those
it.
poor wallabies.
It's still, I don't know, it just feels really wrong.
Many of them are infertile. They can't
Yeah.
ever produce. They're just an end to their lineage.
It's so unfair.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay, so then he claims that
This is so depressing.
there's a lot of studies on animals, unfortunately.
Oh no.
Then he claims that everyone has the genes to make testes or ovaries.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's technically true, and that it's possible, but once the gonads are differentiated, they're stuck there in humans. You can't change them,
No.
even if you take out certain genes.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, human males have all the genes to make ovaries.
Mm-hmm.
We have the WNT4 gene, the RSPO1, and FOXL2. These are 3 important genes for ovarian development. But because SRY is present in the male, and SRY upregulates testes making genes, those female making genes are suppressed.
Mm-hmm.
It suppresses all of that. And so we're not able to make ovaries. And our testes develop, and then we're stuck that way. So, yeah, he's claiming that we all have the genes for making ovaries and testes,
Yeah.
but he's making it seem like we can just develop ovaries or testes at any time
Yeah.
and for any reason.
Right. Which we know doesn't happen.
Yeah, so it goes back to that antagonism at the gene level, that male genes are antagonizing female genes, and male genes are and the vice versa, right?
Yeah.
It's literally the battle of the sexes.
That's just because of misogyny and the
The patriarchy.
that happens.
Hey, but the
So-
female genes are suppressing the male genes
They're only doing that
out of
because-
retaliation.
Yes. If the patriarchy didn't
Yep.
exist, then it wouldn't happen.
Okay, let's see what's next.
Kind of gonads you get, whether it's one or the other or neither or both, comes down to an incredibly complex set of genetic interactions
It's just
on
plain
several
potato.
different chromosomes, a few of which aren't even your sex chromosomes. For example, the gene that builds testes
This is right. There's plenty of genes involved in gonadal differentiation that do not involve the sex chromosomes. But that doesn't call into question what male and female are. It just shows the complex
just-
gene
yeah, it
networks
just
that
shows-
develop
yeah.
male and female.
Which again, Forrest, means that it's all connected. So you can't go just separating them out and acting like they
No.
don't matter. Like, oh.
is called SOX9, and it's on chromosome number 17, which everyone watching this has.
I want to make it clear he's saying that SOX9 is a gene for developing testes. And it's true. Everybody has that gene. It's just that SRY, the master regulator in males, activates and upregulates SOX9 so that SOX9 is not suppressed by the female making genes, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why males develop testes, because of SOX9 being upregulated.
Yeah.
If you have ovaries right now, that's because on
Right
your
now.
X chromosome you have another gene called
Well,
NR.
I mean, I guess I could, something might happen to them and I go somewhere, but just right now, at this second, where are your ovaries? It's 9 p.m. Do you know where your ovaries are?
Does everyone have their ovaries? Calling all the ovaries.
You might have ovaries tomorrow. You don't know.
I misplaced
Do you
them.
have them right now?
I misplaced them. Can you help me find my ovaries, please?
just such a stupid way.
If you have ovaries right now.
How do I know? Which sex has ovaries, Forrest?
Okay, let's see.
Good Lord.
Everyone watching this has. If you have ovaries right now, that's because on your X chromosome you have another gene called NR0B1, which makes a protein called DAX1 that stops SOX9 from giving you testes. But I have an X chromosome too, right? So like, what's going on there? The SRY gene that we've been talking about works by producing a protein that binds to NR0B1 and stops it from making DAX1 so that SOX9 can give me testes.
So this is actually a really cool concept in genetics.
Mm-hmm.
All these different systems suppressing or upregulating each other, right? But you still result in only two outcomes, male or female.
Yeah.
These genes, these genetic networks have evolved to produce either males or females. That is why they're mutually antagonistic in humans, because as a species, we need to be producing equal numbers of males and females. So evolution has come up with a way, a genetic way, to basically create this antagonistic system to ensure that we're born as either male or female. You know?
Yeah.
So it's cool, like this research is cool, but the problem is how he's presenting it and saying that, oh, this means that male and female are arbitrary.
Yeah.
No, you're reinforcing male and female by showing the genetic mechanisms involved in developing them. Let's keep going.
Yes. There's so
That's
much
why
worse.
I have testicles. It's because a gene made a protein that stopped another gene from making a different protein that would have otherwise stopped a different gene from giving me the testicles that I have.
I'm sorry, that was the best place to start it from.
Yeah,
That's
that was
why
great.
I have testicles.
That was
But
great.
just right now, though, just right now, he could have ovaries at any other time.
Yeah, but if I have ovaries later,
Yes. He has testicles right now, but
that's why I have testicles right
oh
now.
my gosh.
Yeah, I mean it's true, it's true.
Yeah.
But again, Forrest, how do we know you're why do testes make you a
Yeah.
male?
Yeah. But I mean, thanks for letting me know. Now I don't need to do the genital inspection to make sure I know that you're male, because I can't tell any other way
Yep.
at all.
No, there's no way.
No.
If you're paying attention, you might be starting to notice a few things here. This means that you
I
could have
have.
a totally perfectly functional Y chromosome, but you have a problem with your SOX9 gene, and so you still end up with ovaries. Or this could mean that you have no Y chromosome at all, but you have a faulty NR0B1 gene, and so you still end up with testicles.
How do we know if they're faulty or functional, Forrest?
Yep, there you go.
How do we know that? How do we classify those things, babe?
Yeah, it's true. Like he's talking about cases where in humans, an XY female might develop because of a genetic mutation, an XX male might develop because of a genetic mutation. And yeah, it's true. These cases are defined as male or female because they develop the phenotypes, the body structures that produce either sperm or eggs, regardless of their chromosomes. So they just reinforce the system of sex,
Yeah.
ultimately.
I just think it's like,
And yes, there are other animals, even other mammals, that don't have an SRY gene, that don't have an NR0B1 gene, that are still dioecious and still have sex differentiation. And there are even other animals that have all the same chromosomes and all the same genes that we have, but then they have other genes on top of that, so the whole switch from male to male back to female again is even more complicated.
So, yes, this is the conflation of genetics and genetic complexity with sex itself. He's saying that there's all these other species that have different genes for developing sex, or no sex chromosomes at all.
right.
And this is the conflation of sex determination mechanisms, the mechanisms that develop your sex, with sex itself. Like, it's amazing to me, the diversity across species in sex determination mechanisms, like ways to develop males or females.
Mhm.
And it's amazing that they all end up with the end product
Yeah.
of males or females.
Yeah. But again, he's doing that obfuscation thing
Mhm.
where he's like, here's the genes for male and female in humans. Anyway, all these other animals don't have them. So, but it's like, and they
And,
have
yeah.
other mechanisms for determining male and female clearly. Otherwise, they wouldn't result in male and female.
Exactly.
So, why are you talking about our genes and then immediately bringing up other animals
Yeah.
like they matter? Like
Like they matter, and that they even like make his point because
they
they
don't.
reinforce our point because it shows that all these animals still develop males or
Yeah.
females. They just have different ways of doing it.
Yeah.
There's an excellent paper that I'll link, which is by a researcher, Batrog et al. Many researchers involved in that paper. It's from 2014. It's called Sex Determination: Why So Many Ways of Doing It. And I've had trans activists link that paper to me as evidence that sex is a spectrum. But you read that paper and you'll see that the researchers are discussing the sex determination mechanisms. Why are there so many ways of developing males versus females? They
Yeah.
make it very clear what male and female are
Mhm.
across all those species and that they're defined the same. It's just
Yeah.
that they're studying the many ways of developing male or female. And that's what the activists conflate all the time.
Yeah.
They don't read the literature and understand it. They think that because there's many ways of developing the sexes, that makes a spectrum of sexes.
Yeah.
That's conflating all those mechanisms with sex.
I was also going to say, like, wow, 2014, ancient, because a lot of these people will say, oh, your study is, 4 years old. We've learned so much more since then. It's like, where? Where is the study that contradicts it then? Because there isn't one. Like, sometimes a study is done and then they just haven't been able to counter it or whatever. So they don't write another study that like contradicts it or that really supports it because they don't have to. It's redundant. Like it's there and it proves the point. So then why rehash it? Why spend the resources and the time and everything like rehashing what they've already learned?
Also, an important part of scientific progress is building on the knowledge that you've already attained.
Yeah.
And that's what you'll notice when you're doing scientific research or doing any research into peer-reviewed literature, is that all these papers, you can see how many times they've been cited. You'll see that, oh, this paper on sex determination was cited 200 times by all these different peer-reviewed papers. That means those papers are referencing that paper
Yeah.
and building on the knowledge.
Yeah.
And
So
yeah,
it doesn't make sense for an activist or anybody to say that because even papers that are new are citing older studies or
Yeah.
older papers. So it's
Yeah.
just
The
it's a go nowhere
yeah,
argument.
I've familiarized myself with the evolution of sex and the decades of peer-reviewed literature on the evolution of male and female. And what I saw was that all these papers link back to each other and build and build and build.
Yeah.
And they're building an entire body of knowledge and body of research. And one of the groundbreaking papers for understanding the evolution of sperm and eggs was written all the way back in 1972. These guys put forward a model for the evolution of sex that has persisted since then and has been replicated and replicated time and time again through mathematical modeling, through observation. And so just because a study is older doesn't mean that it's wrong.
Right.
What matters is what it's saying is if it's saying what matters is if what it is saying is true or false. That's what matters.
Right. Like we wouldn't go claiming that the theory of evolution or anything is like, oh, you're really gonna start talking about the theory of evolution. Do you know when that was?
Do you know when that originated? 1880.
Yeah, it's like
yeah, like gravity.
Yeah,
Like,
or science on,
don't know.
like these people I'm sure would not be cool with anybody disproving science on immunology or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like, so I don't get that argument.
Yeah.
But not that he's making it, but I have
Yeah.
seen it made, and so I just wanted to throw that in there because see it a lot.
Yep.
Well, let's ignore all that. Let's say that you have all the right chromosomes and you have all the right genes in all the right places. None of that really matters because it's the hormones that your gonads produce that actually make your body look and act male or female. All the way back in like...
Okay. So I don't know how to respond to that, honestly. Like, so, okay.
Okay, so now it's not the gonads, now it's not the gametes, now it's not the chromosomes, it's not
the
the
hormones.
genes. Now it's the hormones. Well, Forrest, I hate to tell you this, but males and females have both testosterone and estrogen.
Yeah, that's the thing. We both have testosterone
Like,
and estrogen in our
oh
bodies.
my
It's just that they're
God.
used in different ways and they're
Yeah.
different levels. And let's go back. Let's take a step back. Let me just describe how the hormones actually work in sex development, okay? So, the male, developing a male. After the SRY gene initiates the gene cascade and the gonads differentiate into testes, the testes start producing testosterone, an anti-Müllerian hormone. Testosterone helps build the male's internal reproductive structures, the sperm transportation systems. Anti-Müllerian hormone disintegrates the vestigial system that would have become the female system. Once that is done, testosterone then is converted, at least part of it is converted into what's called dihydrotestosterone, DHT, and that builds the external genitalia of the male. First of all, to have that happen, you have to have the gonads working properly.
Mm-hmm.
You then also have to have the genes working properly to differentiate the gonads into testes.
Which is part of the issue with bringing up like intersex and things like that, people with DSDs, as like something that disproves biological sex, because their hormone regulation is an issue because of like their gonads not producing
Yeah.
the hormones adequately.
Yeah.
So
So
yeah.
if we are to define, say that they're neither sex because they have atypical hormone profile,
Mhm.
well, that would make a lot of people neither sex. A lot of
Yeah.
people don't have typical hormone profiles, or also on top of that, we wouldn't know how to treat them
Yeah.
if we didn't know what sex they were. They didn't know
Right.
what was wrong with their gonads, right?
You can't just pump someone with Klinefelters full of estrogen and
Yeah.
like expect things to go well.
This is the other thing, like the idea that we can just pump somebody, no matter what sex they are, full of an opposite sex hormone,
Mhm.
and their body will just transform into the opposite
Yeah, their
sex.
body's just gonna know exactly what to do with
And
it.
no, as you go through development in the womb, your body is being organized by the gonad and the hormones produced by the gonad and the genetics involved.
Yeah.
And once those tissues are organized, it's very difficult to alter those tissues,
Yeah.
even by opposite sex hormones in your body.
Even when it comes to females who receive like estrogen treatments and things like that, or are on birth control, when you interrupt that endocrine cycle and like the endocrine system, like it's so detrimental in some cases to their health. Like it can cause osteoporosis, it can cause uterine atrophy, it can cause like all kinds of things.
So that
if
shows you
you're-
that there's sex differences in
Right.
the usage of certain
Yes.
hormones like testosterone
Right.
and estrogen.
If your estrogen is like too low, or if your progesterone is affected, like all of these things in females like are very delicately based on hormones. So
Yep.
again, to just say like this really super general term like, oh, it's just your hormones just decide how masculine or feminine. No.
Yeah, see, one side of the so-called spectrum likes to say that, and I don't know how many people this is, but they sometimes will say, "Oh, only testosterone is a male hormone and estrogen is a female hormone." They're in the body for both sexes. It's just that they're used
Yeah.
differently, different levels.
Yeah.
And that's on the other spectrum. Forrest is saying they're just equal and they're just used in the same
Right,
way. It
and
doesn't
he
really
can't
matter.
even say that anyway because of things like aromatase
Yeah.
in certain DSDs that will
Where it
convert
converts, yeah,
the testosterone.
into estrogen.
So
Yeah.
so he can't even say that. Like,
Mm-hmm. Let's see where it goes.
The early 1930s, scientists were noticing that female hormones introduced into male rats were producing some decidedly male behaviors, and that similarly, male hormones introduced into female rats were making them like weirdly more female.
There's an entire literature of behavioral neuroendocrinology where they look at the effects of sex hormones like estrogen and testosterone on the brain and behavior. It's well established that taking cross-sex hormones, whether you're a human, whether you're a mouse, can impact your behavior and your
Right.
psychology. And we see that with detransitioners and their experience, or people who are trans and taking cross-sex hormones. We can see that their experiences talking about those differences as well. That's what
Yeah.
he's talking about here.
Well, And this, like we talked about this with Sammy in our last video, that the way it impacts rodents is different than the way that it impacts humans.
Yes, that's true.
So,
He was
yeah.
saying that estrogen works through aromatase by testosterone converting in aromatase converting testosterone into estrogen, and then estrogen masculinizing the male brain of that rat or of that mouse, because estrogen has a masculinizing effect in mice, where it doesn't really in humans. It works differently.
Right. You know why I call it aromatase instead of aromatase? Pokemon. There's this really funny fat one with like a flowy skirt thing.
That's funny.
All aromatase. It looks like an evil perfume
That's
bottle.
funny.
But yeah, I'll have to show you that one. It even like whistles and like just like little but like, so whenever I think of that word, I think of that Pokemon, and that's why
that makes sense.
that happens. But yeah. I'm sorry.
Okay, let's see.
It's an obsession.
Even though we've been studying this stuff for like 100 years now, a lot of people are still very surprised to find that we all have testosterone and estrogen and all the other sex hormones in our body at all times, and they don't usually do what a lot of people think they do. Let me give you just a grossly oversimplified explanation of how this works. You see, the cholesterol in your body is converted into progesterone, and then that is what becomes testosterone, and that is what gives you what my anatomy professors would call male internal plumbing. Some testosterone is converted into dihydrous testosterone, and that's what gives you male external genitalia.
Which is what I
Some
mentioned.
other testosterone is then converted into estrogen and estradiol, and that's where you get female secondary sex characteristics and get this, male brain anatomy.
He's talking about mice there, as what Sammy was talking about. Yeah, how testosterone being converted into estrogen in the mouse and masculinizing the brain of the male mouse because of the way that the receptors work. He mentioned that there, but he doesn't say that it's in mice.
Right. No.
He make it seem like it's in humans.
I want to have like a literal face off where he and I just make facial expressions to each other.
That'd be great.
Because, like, I think it could be really entertaining.
Yeah.
And that's sorry. And then see, maybe we'd develop a friendship from there.
You go.
And we'd both come away from it being better people.
Let's see.
That's right, female embryos have to produce special proteins to bind estrogen to stop it from getting to their brains. Otherwise, they would develop mentally like a boy.
Yep, mice.
We'll talk more about that stuff later. So every person has all of these hormones at different levels in their body all the time. Your exact hormone levels are as unique as your fingerprint.
Okay, so our hormone levels are unique as our fingerprint, but the problem is there's averages.
Yes.
It's not like we all exist on a flat spectrum. There's an average for males and an average for females.
Yeah.
In fact, males produce so much more testosterone, 15 to 20 times more circulating testosterone in the average male's body than the average female's body. That means that there's almost no overlap. In fact, the lowest testosterone in a male doesn't even come close to the highest amount of testosterone in a female.
No.
That really shows you why we call them sex hormones, because of their huge differences, right?
And the female menstrual cycle, I know I've mentioned it a few times, but it's important, is super, super dependent on the levels of estrogen, progesterone, FSH, LH, like all of these things like happening at certain times in your body. And it does have to do with your brain and like all the signals being sent back and forth in order to have your menstrual cycle like successfully throughout your fertile years.
It's a tightly orchestrated series of hormonal interactions that go from the brain to the ovary back to the brain, and it's this feedback loop.
We have to know what those averages are for those hormone levels for females in order to know if something's going wrong with your cycle.
Exactly.
So
progesterone will peak in the cycle at some certain time, and then during the proliferative phase where the uterus is growing the endometrial tissue, estrogen will peak. And so they're not peaking at the same time. And then you got a follicular stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. So
and you need to know when those are happening and everything in order to calculate fertility. But we've lost this. Like as common knowledge. I don't really know if it ever really was.
That the female endocrine system doesn't really matter. that it's not. Yeah.
Exactly. That you can, just stop at any time and it's unimportant and this, but it does regulate
So he's
things.
contributing to the misinformation and the
Yes.
obfuscation of the
Yes.
importance of the female endocrine system.
And this is why I highly recommend, if you ever actually want to learn about your cycle in an effective way right now, we're going to do a series on it. But if you want to learn about your cycle in an effective way, please go to a fertility website. Do not go to a birth control website, or like just like period websites and stuff like that. They're not great at explaining it, but the fertility websites are.
Yeah, the fertility websites give like the detailed science and explanation
Right.
of how specific the conditions have to be for you to get pregnant.
Yes.
And also the hormonal fluctuations that tell you when you're ready to conceive.
Because unlike males, we are not fertile for, the entire year, every year until we get menopause. That's not how that works. So, yes, if you want to learn about your cycle, I highly recommend a fertility website that can tell you how to track your cycle, which is really helpful, especially if you have something like endometriosis or something that's debilitating that knocks you out for a couple weeks or anything like that. Learn it that way, because period websites or websites that are about birth control are so inaccurate. And they don't really go into like the tracking and all of those levels and things like that the way that the fertility websites do. So much more helpful and really, really valuable to women and like learning about those things. So yeah, please don't contribute to that misinformation for us. As I said before, women have it hard enough with our reproductive health, and we really could do without your little situation that you're engaging in. Thanks.
It's also important to note that hormones don't actually do anything.
So
that was deeply flawed. That was deeply flawed. Buddy, don't.
So hold on a second. He just said earlier, like just a minute or two ago, that hormones have everything to do with controlling whether you develop as a male or female. And then he said right here, hormones don't actually do anything.
They do a lot throughout your life.
Let's see what his explanation is for why they don't do anything.
All they're able to do is bind to receptors on your cells, and then that makes the cells do the things that make you into a male or a female.
So he's saying, you see what he's saying? So he's obfuscating the role of hormones by saying that it's really the cell that produces the proteins. And but the whole reason the cell produces the proteins is because the hormone binds to the receptors, right? The hormone is the messenger. It's the signal that travels across the body and tells the body what to do. And I cannot believe he said that. Let me read this really quick. So hormones, they're integral to the process of making those proteins. They coordinate different functions in the body by carrying messages through the blood to the organs. They tell the body what to do and when to do it. That was from a recent study from 2017 on the hormonal system.
He's going back to cells because originally, in the very beginning of this long journey that we've been on, he said that cells were the smallest thing that we can call alive, and he tried to make cells seem like they're the most important little building block or whatever. And now he's trying to tie it back there by saying, well, it's the cells that are doing this. And okay. So first he's talking about chromosomes, then no, it's the genes. And no, it's not actually the genes. It's actually the hormones. And no, it's not actually the hormones. It's actually the cells.
The cells.
And
he keeps doing that constantly.
So he keeps...
It's not the cells, it's the atoms.
Yeah, really. Is that where we're going to go? I mean...
It's not the atoms, it's the protons and electrons.
Yes. So it's just...
It's the quarks.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
Gosh.
But you can't understand function of any system with this type of logic. Let's keep going.
And guess what? The production of those cell receptors is controlled by a totally different gene pathway. So,
Oh,
for
now we're back
example,
to
you could
genes.
have a daughter who still hasn't had her period by like 16. So you take her to the doctor to figure out what's going on, and you find out that your daughter is actually your son who has androgen insensitivity syndrome. So their cells aren't producing their receptors to bind testosterone. So even though they've got enough testosterone in their body to give them freaking antlers and a mane, they still look and feel like a girl.
This is
Right. So first of all,
what we
very
were just talking
very offensive to people with this
I cannot
traumatizing
believe
disorder.
He said antlers and a mane.
So first of all, what he's talking about is androgen insensitivity syndrome, where a fetus loses its ability through a gene mutation to receive testosterone. So they produce testosterone, but they can't. Their body can't respond to it and can't make those proteins in the cells. And this occurs in a 46XY fetus. And so they have the SRY gene, like a typical male, and they start developing down the male pathway, and their gonads actually differentiate into testes. But then at that point, male development kind of stops, and they switch down to the female pathway. So once the testes are differentiated, they can't actually receive the testosterone. So their body feminizes. They develop a vagina, vulva. They actually go through female puberty and develop wider hips and breasts.
Yeah,
and
which
all
female
this.
puberty is not just getting your period. Like overwhelmingly, yes, females who go through puberty get a period, but it's also like your body development. It's not just a period.
Right. And with this condition, they do go through all of that except menstruation. They
Right.
can't have periods because they don't have a uterus. They don't have ovaries. But the reason why we can say that they have a female phenotype minus the testicular tissue is that they develop the external genitalia and overall body plan of a
just
of
like
a female.
the ducks.
Similar to the ducks example.
The ducks develop the phenotype that corresponds with the sex that they have at the time, which he could say if you have an ovary right now to a duck. Like the duck could answer.
Now, he says that they have superhuman levels of testosterone, and that's true, but they can't respond to it. Now, why do they have superficial levels, or sorry, why do they have superhuman levels of testosterone? That's because there's a feedback loop going on where the body notices that it's not receiving or responding to the testosterone properly, so it's telling the testes to make more testosterone, and it just can't be used. So a big portion of that testosterone is actually converted through aromatase into estrogen, and so that's a big part of what contributes to the feminization of not only the body but even the brain. Is in these cases is that impact of estrogen through the production of testosterone and that conversion.
Yeah.
And from a biological definition of sex standpoint, these cases are called male DSDs because they develop testes, but the testes are in the abdomen, and the sperm does not exist. That raw material that turns into sperm, it was never able to differentiate because it doesn't have the cells or the hormonal response to be able to actually differentiate those cells into immature sperm cells. So they don't have any gametes at all. They can't produce gametes. And so to use this case in such a way is really, really not appropriate. And to communicate it like he did and to say that, oh, they should be growing antlers and a mane. It's like, really?
He would,
really?
though, because he keeps confusing other animals with humans. But, I mean...
These women cannot ever give birth. They can't ever conceive.
No, and think about how, like, psychologically traumatizing it is to have it represented this way by somebody on such a large platform to a huge audience. Like, really? Like, again, spreading misinformation in a really offensive way that should they have an interaction with someone who watched one of your videos, Forrest, And then someone refers to their condition that way, like, oh, I heard you should have enough testosterone to be growing antlers and a mane. Like, buddy, you know, I keep wanting to give this guy the benefit of the doubt. I keep, like, there's that part of me that's like, maybe you should not make faces. Maybe you should blah, blah, blah. No, it's warranted. You're a jerk. Like, I'm sorry. It's really uncool. It's really freaking lame. And some other words that I'd rather not say right now. Like,
And we know people who have these conditions like androgen sensitivity syndrome, and we know that how traumatizing and difficult it is to
yeah.
realize at 16 or something
Yeah.
that, oh, I'm not having my period as a female, as a woman. There must be something wrong.
Yeah.
And so they go and find out that they actually have XY chromosomes, and they have internal testes that don't function properly.
There have been women
Like that is traumatizing and life-changing.
Yes.
And it's not right to use them this way.
No, there have been women affected by this condition that have taken their lives because it was so traumatic to them, and they were so conflicted because people treated them like they should be a man or whatever, and they had like those internal conflicting feelings. It is so awful to present it in this way where it's like playful, haha, like they should have antlers and a mane, like, but for real, like,
Yeah. Anything else we should say about that condition? Or
no,
I think that's it.
yeah, we should just keep playing it before I say something else about it.
A couple of other important notes about sex chromosomes. Females tend to have XX chromosomes, but that second X doesn't really do much. It tends to just shrivel up, and only about 15% of it is actually expressed at any given time. And
He's talking about X-inactivation, which is a process in females in species like ours, where the two X chromosomes, we don't want the gene networks on both chromosomes to be activating at the same time in every cell, because then you get a double, what's called double gene product. And there's evolved systems for fixing that, and that's one, is where one X chromosome in every cell inactivates. Usually it's divided in half, like the paternal X chromosome is inactivated in half the cells, and the maternal X chromosome is inactivated in the other half. And that's to create a random genetic mix between the X chromosomes. But to say that it's like doesn't matter, or that it just shrivels up, like, come on, like, talk about it in more detail, like provide the viewers with an actual understanding of what is going on.
One might call that deeply flawed
as
well.
Like, it's fundamental to human females with X inactivation.
You know
it's
what?
important with disease and all these different systems.
I'm gonna just come out and say I think his character is deeply flawed. How about that? I think that's accurate. Like,
someone who has a good character would not be talking about medical conditions like AIS that way.
No, and would not so confidently and willfully be spreading misinformation to impressionable youth on TikTok and on YouTube this way. Like, no, buddy, no.
Okay, let's keep going.
whether it's the first or the second X totally varies from cell to cell. You could literally have two cells right next to each other, one of them expressing the first X chromosome, the other one expressing the second X chromosome. Conversely, the Y chromosome mainly codes for male-specific biochemistry and functionality, things like the special ribosomes that I talked about earlier.
Can I just say, like, saying cells right next to each other is such a crappy way to put it. Like, that's not, your cells aren't just neatly lined up next to each other. Like, it's just, anyway. Yeah.
As well as things like sperm production. But remember, these genes can only be expressed under certain conditions and in certain parts of the body. So, like, for example, that sperm production gene is only ever going to be expressed in the testes. If I don't have testes because of one of the other genetic variations that we talked about a minute ago, this gene does nothing. Even if you have the gene, even if you have the whole chromosome, you could still be missing any one of 5 different pieces of the puzzle of what sex determination actually is.
Yeah, so
Space.
there's plenty of situations where genes don't activate. Like I said before, with how males have all the genes for ovarian development, but they're just not upregulated, they're just not expressed. They were not expressed in the embryo. So those genes are just not really doing anything for ovarian development because the testes are there and
Yeah.
stabilized now, right? So I don't really understand. I mean, it's an interesting genetic like anecdote about how genes work and how they don't always express themselves. So you have to have certain tissues for it to be expressed. But
Yeah.
what's the point? Like, so what? Like,
Yeah.
what's his point in relationship to male and female?
I I don't I would love to know what his point is ever at all about anything. Like other than it's just because then it backs up what I said.
Yeah.
And it's like it doesn't though. But okay.
Okay, let's keep.
Oh, and by the by, literally everything that I just said is completely reversed in birds. Birds don't have XY, they have ZW, and it's the boys that are homogenous in their chromosomes. So they have ZZ, and the girls have ZW, and they have to go through the complicated back and forth gene pathway just to stay girls.
And what does that matter with humans?
And how do we define them as male or female still?
Yeah.
It's because even though the males have ZZ chromosomes, they're male because they have the phenotype that produces sperm. And the females with ZW, they're females because they have the phenotype that produces eggs. That just reinforces the system of
Yeah.
sex. And sex determination mechanisms, like we said, vary.
Yeah.
Birds used a different one than humans, but they still result in males or females. So
And don't even get me started on dioecious versus monoecious plants, man, because they're even weirder. They're a
we remember that he got monoecious incorrect when he said it was
Yeah.
one sex, but it was
So
actually
he
two sexes
really-
in one.
Yeah, he really doesn't want anyone to get him started on
No.
it because he doesn't know what the heck he's
No.
talking about.
lots of different species that don't have any differences in their sex chromosomes at all. They have totally different ways of establishing and differentiating their sexes.
Well, we don't establish or differentiate it based on chromosomes anyway. Gosh.
Well, even in species like he's saying that don't have sex chromosomes, there's different mechanisms.
Yeah,
to-
that's
like-
what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
Like in crocodiles, they
Yeah.
use temperature, where certain temperature values at which the eggs are incubating develop into males, like cause development into a male, or cause development into a female. And that just depends on the temperature, but they still end up male or female.
he's ruining Elizabethan music for me.
Like this, yeah, not bad music in the background,
No,
but yeah, the association's not great.
No.
But
I can
yeah.
never go to Ren Fair again.
But yeah, like, I think it's just weird that like, I think this stuff is really cool. Like the genetic stuff is really cool,
Yeah.
but he's trying to make it seem like male and female are arbitrary. He keeps
Yeah.
doing the same thing, but it just reinforces our point.
Man, he must be like no telemarketers or anything must ever call his house because he
Oh,
just
man,
would
yeah.
talk them through circles
Yeah,
and just like bore the pants off of them.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you what, we are, oh my God, because we've had to elaborate so much on so many points, we're only like halfway through this
yeah.
video.
Maybe we can shorten our points now.
Like, for
maybe.
example, there are lots of species of turtles and lizards and fish where sex is determined not by chromosomes, but by the temperature of their eggs. So you have a female leopard gecko. She lays her eggs in a cool, shady spot. All of the babies are going to be female. But if she lays them in a warm, sunny spot, all of the babies will be male.
How do you know what male and female are, Forrest?
Mhm.
You know? How do you know what male and female are? You're using the terms like you know what they mean.
Yeah.
They have a meaning. Okay, let's keep going.
Unless it gets too warm and then they switch back over to female, but they're incredibly aggressive, and we call those hot females because herpetologists are not very imaginative. And it's really, really important to point out that when we're talking about these long genetic pathways, where any one step along the way could take us way off track, what we're talking about are variations, not anomalies, not deformities, not defects, variations.
This is a big problem that we've discussed already, but right here is that conflation of variation with disorder. Not every variation is healthy.
Yeah.
He was listing out variations of like sex determination mechanisms in species. Those are the standard templates, healthy templates for those species. In the disorders that we've talked about, chromosomal disorders, genetic disorders, disorders of the gonads, genitalia, like the ones that impact the healthy functioning of the body,
Mm-hmm.
those are disorders. They're not healthy
Right.
variations. They need medical treatment.
Right.
And
Like, again, going back to our, like, this has penetrated the medical community.
Mhm,
So going back to our friend,
mhm.
like, what? So his doctor doesn't think he needs treatment, even though not getting that treatment would kill him. Like, it,
Yeah, you're telling people with developmental disorders that they don't need treatment.
yeah.
Or you're implying that.
Yeah,
And so,
no,
yeah,
your cancer's not a problem. It doesn't need to be treated.
it's just a variation.
It's just a variation of how your cells are working. Like, dude, again, like, I really, really, really don't want to attribute the worst to this person, but
There's this tendency now to say that we shouldn't call anything disordered.
yeah.
And development that's healthy variation, yeah, we shouldn't call it disordered, but there are actual disorders that need to
Yeah.
be treated. Like that difference has to exist. It does exist and it's important. So
Mhm.
let's keep going.
And there's a huge difference. Over the years, I've studied in a lot of anatomy labs, and I've dissected a lot of human cadavers as well as other animals, and we see variations all the time. Just differences from the textbook. Little changes in how an artery branches, or how a nerve passes through a muscle, or even big things like the shape or position of a whole organ. These are classified as variations and not deformities or anomalies because they happen a lot more often than you might think, and they don't really cause any harm. They're just relatively inconsequential differences.
What if they do cause harm?
Yeah.
Then they would be disorders or
Yes.
conditions, medical conditions.
Like, I'm sorry, but having a lung that is smaller than the other one is going to cause problems. Having a chamber in your heart that is smaller than it needs to be is going to cause problems. Having, like, something in your eye not form properly, like a structure in there not forming properly, is going to impact your vision, which is going to cause problems. Like, oh my God, this is why we have so many, like, different.
Losing your androgen receptor, your T
Yeah.
receptor as a XY male fetus is gonna make you infertile. Like, yeah.
Removing, part of your uterus because of something is going to cause problems. Like, you can get prolapses and everything else. Like, it's just,
Let's keep going.
Between one person and another. So my question is it really so hard to accept that things like sex or gender could be subject to the same kinds of variations, and that those variations would be, at most, equally inconsequential?
So, sex, there are variations in people's bodies and people's
Yes.
psychologies, and there's averages, an average for males and an average for females.
mm-hmm.
But we can only define that variation as related to the sexes because we know what male and female are in the first
Yes.
place. And there's a healthy, incredible amount of variation
Yes.
within males
Yes.
and within females. But that variation, like we said before, overlap between two categories in certain traits does not make those traits social constructs.
Right. Also, what is he defining as gender, and why is he bringing it up now when he's talking about, like,
Mhm.
developmental differences? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what does that have to do with
And he still hasn't
gender?
defined it. So
No, well, he can't, because if you
yeah.
do, then that's transphobic.
Yeah.
So,
This may shatter someone's whole worldview, but it needs to be said. In fact, if you take nothing else away from this video, I hope you understand this one point. An X or a Y chromosome is neither necessary nor is it sufficient for determining your sexual identity.
my sexual identity?
Yeah, it's unclear if he's saying your sex or your identity in terms of how you feel about yourself. It's unclear. I've had activists argue to me that, yeah, you don't necessarily need an X or a Y. That means if you have other gene mutations or translocations that produce the testes or ovaries, then you might not need the Y chromosome. But that's due to genetic disorders. You need the Y chromosome for healthy development because it has the important male sex determining genes and the genes involved in sperm production and all that. And so, of course, they're critical for your sex. Now, when it comes to like how you feel, that's a different story altogether.
Can I shatter his whole worldview right now? As someone with gender dysphoria, wanting to escape your body, because of your sex, isn't healthy, and it's not like a comfy place to be because you can't ever do it. So, yeah, no, like please do not, because you're
So he's saying that your genes do not
like
actually determine your sex and also like your sexual, like how you feel about
my
yourself,
sexual
identity, and that you can, he's implying that you can
Yeah.
change that.
I'm really not sure what he's implying here, other
It's
than like
it's unclear what he,
gender identity, which would
yeah.
happen to not conflating sex and gender, but okay.
Again, he might be talking about sexual identity I've heard described as like your body, like your sex.
Right.
But I've also heard sexual identity being how you identify, right?
Right.
So it's unclear.
Like,
So yeah, let's keep going.
There is no standard template for male
Yes, there
versus
is.
female development in biology.
That is a crazy statement to make. It's like saying there's no standard template for like developing a heart in humans or eyes
humans.
or humans themselves. There's no standard template for a human.
No standard template for
The
human.
divide between, you know, a great ape or like the divide between
pig.
a pig or yeah, a human is just arbitrary.
Yeah, it's just arbitrary.
And yeah, so first of all, no, there is a standard template for male and female development in humans. We see it happen every day with every baby that's born.
Yep.
And we also have verified that through karyotype studies like discussed before, looking at the genetics, seeing that, oh, okay, their chromosomes align with their body in more than 99.99% of births.
Yeah.
So, yes, there is a standard healthy development template for developing as a male versus developing as a female. That doesn't mean that there's no variation in like genitalia size or height or the
Yeah.
development of your gonads, right? There's small variations, but that doesn't mean that there's no standard template. Those variations exist within the male template versus the female template.
Yeah.
So again, conflating sex characteristics or variation with sex itself.
Oh my God. I like, oof. He's lucky he's so tall. Otherwise, I would high five his face. Like,
Also,
oh
I
my
want to also
gosh.
mention that chromosomal disorders like XXY or XXX or XYY, these result often in infertility. So they're not variations, they're disorders of sex development that
Right.
impact your fertility, and they deviate from that standard template
Yeah.
of XX versus XY.
Mhm.
But they're still male or female
Yeah.
because they develop the phenotypes that produce either sperm or eggs, but
Yeah.
they have different chromosomes. That's a chromosomal abnormality,
Right.
similar to like Down syndrome,
Yeah.
which is when you receive an extra copy of chromosome 21.
And going back to what, like, his offensive statement on AIS, like, and oh, they're producing so much testosterone, they should be growing antlers and a mane. That kind of rhetoric has also surfaced in certain circles where people have made statements that because their brains are swimming in testosterone, that those women are extremely violent or something like that. More violent than, the most like violent criminal males. Like that's
But
the accusation that I've
that's
heard.
the accusation.
Yeah.
But because they don't have a male psychological profile, because they can't receive any testosterone, they don't have any type of male aggression patterns,
Right.
any of that.
So again, saying that kind of stuff, Forrest, is just adding to that kind of rhetoric that is very bigoted and ignorant when it comes to those women, and it's so harmful. So yeah, I just, yep, don't like him. I don't like him.
He portrays those
Don't.
women as though they're like gonna be these
Yeah,
super
they're
masculine,
flooded
aggressive.
with,
Yeah, and that's not the case at all.
yeah, like,
And the reason why they're females in the first place is because they can't respond to any testosterone
yeah. Well,
in the womb.
yeah.
Okay.
And unless you have had your DNA sequenced and analyzed by a developmental biologist, you have no idea what's going on with you in this respect. As it stands,
That's so not true. It's very safe to say that if you are a male who produces sperm and is fertile, there's nothing, you have no chromosomal disorders or anything like that. You're good to go. Like, yeah, when it comes to women, if you're having a period and you're able to get pregnant and everything, like, again, probably
Yeah.
like good to
Yeah.
go. No developmental
Yep.
like chromosome disorders or anything like that. You do not need a karyotyping test at that point. Now, if it's coming down to you're not fertile for some reason, might want to get that testing
Yeah.
done.
You might have a genetic
Right.
disorder.
Right.
Yeah.
If it comes down to, oh, again, like I'm 16, I haven't had a period like the rest of my peers, like might want to look into that.
So he makes it seem like there's just this like equal level of chance that maybe you
Right.
are XXY or whatever,
Yeah,
right? And that's not the
no,
case at all. Like,
no.
again, like I mentioned, the reason I mentioned the karyotype studies is because I wanted to respond to that. Is that
Yeah,
we've done the genetic studies. We have shown that almost every single birth results in XX or XY in
Yeah.
humans,
yeah,
and that there is a very, very small percentage that have
Yeah.
chromosomal disorders. But again, that usually shows up pretty quick
yeah.
in development, like whether through infertility or through
Yeah.
other developmental issues.
And also, like, it's again important to note things like fertility or a menstrual cycle to know if you have something that isn't necessarily a developmental disorder, but something like PCOS or endometriosis, which PCOS can result in facial hair and things like that. And why would, like, I feel like this type of rhetoric adds to the stigma of, like, oh, if you're developing facial hair and things like that, better watch out. Better watch out because you might be male. Like,
Yeah, he'd argue that,
you
yeah.
don't know.
Yeah.
Like, it. Come on, dude. Like, we
It
don't
actually,
need to
you know
do
what it
that.
actually does is it actually increases people's gender dysphoria
It
of
does.
like having gender dysphoria because it shows you, or it's trying to argue that your sex could be
Yeah.
like not determined or malleable
Right.
or up for debate, right?
Like,
And that, oh my gosh, I could find out that I'm actually a woman, and
yeah.
it actually incentivizes that thought structure.
Yes. When I was having issues like vaginal atrophy and things like that from being on birth control, and having my hormones messed with, like, I thought some of the issues that I was having because of my gender dysphoria were because I really had like some kind of male like thing in my body and I was meant to be like male. Like it wasn't. No, it was because of the the birth control I was taking like affecting me. Like it doesn't, again, doesn't help people with gender dysphoria. It doesn't help anybody to have this kind of rhetoric out there, and it's stigmatizing.
And it obfuscates the important medical
Yeah.
care for people who have those really
Yeah.
rare disorders.
Like, this is not okay.
there are more than enough variations on the sex chromosomes alone to make a male that is feminine enough or a female that is masculine enough to pass as the opposite gender in both social circles and even to themselves.
No.
This whole sentence, I don't know what it means at all, honestly, because he's not clear. What does variation on the sex chromosome mean? Does it mean like gene variation inside the sex chromosomes? What does he mean when he says that they pass as the opposite gender? Does he mean sex? He hasn't defined gender yet. He
I
seems to be
think
conflating
he's
the two. It's really
referring back
weird.
to AIS or something. That's the only thing I can
Yeah.
think of. But
It's just really unclear. Like it's not,
yeah,
nothing's
or like
clear.
Klinefelters maybe. But
Yeah. But males with Klinefelters don't pass as the opposite sex.
No.
They're males and they're very
Like,
clearly males.
yeah.
Like so yeah, it's weird.
And it also like makes it seem like, oh, the reason why I'm not passing, like, I hate this stupid passing argument. I really do, because like trans goals and passing and all of that stuff, it really is chasing the dragon. And it makes it so people are constantly editing themselves and like freaking out when they aren't like able to look in the mirror and see exactly what they want to see because of the nature of body dysmorphia and the obsessive compulsive disorder that can come with gender dysphoria in a lot of cases. So, like, can we not with this? Like, can we just throw that away and stop with this stupid, like, oh, then you pass even to yourself. Like, sometimes you never end up passing, like, even to yourself because of body dysmorphia. Like, we see it with eating disorders too. To establish that kind of precedent is going to set up in somebody's head, like, if what I see in the mirror isn't passing to me, then there's something wrong with me genetically now. Like,
Yeah,
or,
this
they
is
got
yeah.
so lucky with their genetics because they passed, but like, come on.
I just realized a huge hypocrisy point with Forrest is that he was arguing that there's no standard male or female development template.
Yeah.
And then he's saying here that there's some type of standard to compare yourself with for passing
Yeah.
as the opposite sex.
Yeah.
And doesn't that go against what he's been saying?
Yeah. Like,
And isn't that enforcing a construct standard that
it is.
So,
because
yeah.
there are, as I'm sure he would argue, because it's true, there are some very feminine looking men, and there are some very masculine looking women. And like, just naturally, without any kind of hormone intervention or anything, or any kind of a DSD, it's just how they develop.
Yeah, so I'd say why can't we just accept the within sex, as in
Yeah.
within male, within female variation on people's bodies
Yeah.
and behavior, rather than enforcing some type of passing
Like
standard?
some sort of stupid gender
Yeah.
stereotype.
Like, if
passing
you want to talk about
standard.
what's constructed, that is something that's
Yeah.
socially constructed. So, yeah.
Mm-mm.
The language of genetics is in no way laconic or easy to decipher, and that makes it completely impossible to reduce things like sex and gender down to a binary. Gametes can be gendered in this way. Brains and bodies cannot.
Okay, I don't see, what does he mean by gendered?
Yeah.
So gametes can be gendered, he said, but brains and bodies cannot? Well, gametes are the fundamental distinction between the sexes, sperm and
Yeah.
egg. It's what everything is based on. It's what our reproductive anatomy evolved from, that difference. It's what the behavioral differences that we see often
Yeah.
evolved from, is that difference in reproductive role. And then when it comes to our bodies, yeah, like they're very different. And
Yeah.
they're very easily sexed. You can very
Yeah.
easily tell without even taking anybody's clothes off who's male and who's female. And on top of that, brains. Like
there
there's
are
yeah.
androgynous people. Let's just also throw that in there. That sometimes it can be hard to tell, especially if they're trans and they are like passing or what
Right.
have you.
But it doesn't
or
mean that they're
detrans
somehow
or-
the opposite sex. They're
Right.
still
They
the
are
sex
still
that they
yes.
developed as by their
And
genetics.
right. And there are ways that you can, test or whatever if need be. But like to sit there and say that again, it's like such BS and it's obfuscating. And again, it's really not helping with things like genetic disorders that need testing and healthcare. And it's not great in terms of like women's healthcare
Yeah.
either. Like, our bodies are very different than yours, Forrest. Like, my female body is very, very different from yours.
Yeah.
And it needs different healthcare. It needs different healthcare from a trans woman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, a trans woman and that care regimen post-op is very different than a female one. Like, the bacteria is different. The care for a vagina versus the surgical construct of like the neo vagina,
Mm-hmm.
like all of that is
Mhm.
very different. And if you were to do one's care for the other, it could be dangerous. Like, leaving a vagina without like douching and things like that, like on its own, if there's no like yeast infection or whatever, that's how you're supposed to do it. Douching and things like that can end up like being detrimental to the health of a vagina. But if you were to do that with a trans woman, just leave it as is and not douche and not dilate and things like that, you could end up with some serious infections, like closures, loss of depth, and everything else. So, like, don't. Like, you're not helping anybody, dude. Like, you're hurting people. This is not okay.
Yeah.
The point that I'm trying to make here is that even what you might call normal is a massively diverse group of people. We all live on a spectrum, and people are under no obligation to make sense to you.
This is the common argument that you see with the sex spectrum, is that everybody can be put into their own bin, and that there's no like system, like reproductive system, that is differentiated between the sexes. There's nothing to differentiate the sexes. We're all just unique. Well, it's true that we're all unique individuals, but we're divided into male or female forms.
Yeah.
And that brings with it a whole host of important differences.
But, you know, I guess he's under no obligation to make sense to me. So, you know, why are you bothering to try and teach people, educate people on biology or sex?
If no one's supposed to make sense to you, or you're not supposed to know
if there's no
any
norm
difference.
or no knowledge to be applied. If there's no knowledge to be applied and nothing to learn other than there is nothing to learn because we're all just individuals and we need to be treated by our doctors without any kind of standard, just as individuals, which would be really freaking difficult for doctors. Like, even like endocrine specialists do not go off of like your individualized hormone profile unless there's something like wrong. Specifically, they're going off of like averages.
We can't assume that your heart is actually functioning like a heart. It might be functioning like a kidney.
Yeah.
It might be it might be filtering urine through, I don't know. Like that's the kind of mentality.
Yeah, there's no way to know if that's even
brings.
where your heart is in your body unless we do like a full workup on you. Like, there's a reason why when you go to your doctor, you don't get like full workups and MRIs and everything else. Like, there's a standard. And he's acting like those standards don't exist. He's acting like there's nothing to compare it to, that there's that everything is totally individualized, and that nothing makes sense and nothing has a definition. And no, that's not how it works. Like, oh my gosh. Ugh.
The other point that I'm trying to make is that we really need to stop saying things like XX equals girl. At most, we need to be saying things like people with XX are typically girls.
Okay, so this is actually an interesting point, but he is kind of obfuscating things like he is doing normally throughout the whole video. So almost always in humans, XX results in a female. But we do not define sexes by chromosomes. We define them by the reproductive anatomy they develop with respect to the production and release of either sperm or eggs. And almost always we can correlate XX chromosomes to that phenotype.
Yeah.
But sometimes due to genetic disorders, or even in other species where they don't use XX chromosomes to develop into a female, we still define sex by that universal definition of gonad gamete type. And that's what he doesn't mention here. And it's why we can define people who have XY chromosomes who develop a female system, even with ovaries, as females. We don't call them male because of the system they develop in relationship to gamete type. So, yeah, he's making it seem like it's not as common as it is to develop with XX as a female.
Yeah.
But it's almost always, almost near 100% the case.
Yeah.
So.
We need to do away with all of this unnecessarily heteronormative language if we're going to ameliorate the way that our society perceives and treats gender as a whole. But to really understand what I mean by that,
what does heterosexuality have to do with it?
Yeah, male and female across the animal and plant kingdoms. Like, what does that have to do with certain constructs related to heterosexuality in society?
Other than the fact that that's what leads to reproduction.
Yeah.
Is heterosexual reproduction.
It's required to produce new individuals.
But,
and
like,
what
does the heteronormativity
I don't get
term
it.
have to do with it here? Like, also,
but he's using girls and boys.
Yeah.
And when you call that heteronormative language,
I would. And
like in terms of his viewpoint.
Yeah. Also, what does heterosexuality have to do with being trans, like, or having gender dysphoria? Like, that.
Yeah.
Doesn't impact my sexuality.
Let's try to define gender. Gender is a fluid term and a social construct. And if you don't believe me on that, just think about this with me for a second. Can a real man wear a dress? Can a real woman fix a car? What about ordering a fruity cocktail?
Yes, they can do all those different things because they are males or females who
Yeah.
can have a diverse way of expressing themselves, and it doesn't change their sex.
Like, what does that have to do with
What
sex?
exactly? Let's keep going and see.
To do that. What about being the primary bread earner of the house? Whose job is that? When you think about it for more than
Whoever
2
wants the
seconds,
job.
you start to realize that the way that we define gender is completely arbitrary, and it
Right.
varies from generation to generation, if not from person to person.
So if he's talking about like the expression and roles that are layered onto males and females from society,
Mhm.
that is arbitrary to a degree. It still has its link back to
Right.
referring to males and females, and some of those roles were defined or developed over time because of the different reproductive roles.
Right.
How females have to invest so much resources in gestating the offspring and giving
Right.
birth and taking care of the
Which is
infant.
why in regressive cultures, when a male is effeminate or when they have too many sons, like in the Fafafini culture, they will make those sons into daughters and have them do female roles, like female typical roles,
Right.
like tending to laundry and taking care of the children because there aren't enough girls in the family, or because they were effeminate and they're regressive that way, and so they push those roles.
Right. So, so
onto
they don't
boys.
accept that boys can express those different
Right.
roles in
Right.
society. They say, well, that can only happen in
Right.
girls, and that makes you a girl. Is that what they're saying
Right.
basically? That it
Yes.
makes you a girl if you express those different roles.
Or I can't remember the name of the culture, but I think it's in Poland, where females who want to own property and things like that have to basically take on a male social role, and they're not allowed to marry and things like that, but they are then allowed to own property. So,
So those
like,
examples
again,
are reinforcing
right, they're
constructs,
reinforcing
social
really
constructs.
harmful gender stereotypes and social constructs, not really helping your case by
Yeah.
talking about gender
All these people are
roles
still
in
male or
relation to
female.
sex.
Like
Yeah.
like whatever gender quote unquote role you have, how you
Yeah.
express yourself or behave
Yeah.
in relationship to your sex,
Yeah.
like that doesn't define your sex.
No, it doesn't make you any less male or
Yeah.
female. It doesn't make you any less a man or a woman.
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
being gay doesn't make you any less a man or a
Yep.
woman. So what's the point? Why
yeah.
is he bringing this up here? I don't understand.
I mean, consider the fact that our traditional nursery colors of blue for boys and pink for girls was only really
swapped.
established in the 1940s. Before that, dressing a boy in pink would have been all the rage, but now if you ask most people, they'd say that dressing a boy in pink is like somehow obscene.
See, we agree. It doesn't matter
Yeah.
like what color males and females wear.
Right.
It just doesn't matter. Like that doesn't
Yeah.
make them the opposite sex.
My friend's a costume mistress, and she like made these beautiful Renaissance like robes and things like that for her son when he was little,
Mhm.
and most of them were pink or red or something
Mhm.
like that because of like those were the colors used during those periods of
Mhm.
time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's cool.
The truth is that masculine and feminine really don't mean anything in concrete terms, certainly not in biological terms.
Here's another problem. Masculine and feminine just really describes your average behavioral patterns within males and
Yeah.
females. So a trait that is expressed more in males, you can say that it's a masculine trait. And a
And
trait that's
again-
expressed more in females, it's a feminine trait.
Yeah.
But males can express feminine
Yes.
traits and females can express masculine traits.
And again, there are averages.
Yeah.
And there are averages when it comes to, like, you know, as we've discussed before, brain patterns and behavior and stuff like that, which is why boys and girls do better in certain learning environments.
Yeah.
So, like, catering to that on average is probably better
Yeah.
for their ways of learning than, like, ignoring it
Yeah.
and just applying a blanket thing
Like,
to everybody.
We can do both at once. We can
Yeah.
cater to the average
Yeah,
pattern
while
and also
understanding.
accept and understanding the variation
Yes.
that doesn't exist within the average.
Right.
And that's something, but Forrest wants to get rid of the average and the norm completely.
Right.
He wants to act like masculine and feminine don't mean anything,
Right.
that we should dispense with it, while upholding regressive
Right.
stereotypes
And
of masculine and
again,
feminine.
like, this goes back to evolution and behavior and things like that, and I've talked about it a little bit I'd really like to read more about it. But we did evolve based on our biology, and that kind of made our behavior cater to that. So, like, males were more likely to go out and hunt and things like that. Women were more likely to stay in like groups and take care of the young and things like that and forage nearby because it was safer and less intensive. And we already have to expend so many resources on menstruation, on childbearing, on child rearing, like, because we have the baby is nourished by us, they are with us most of the time when they're young. So males didn't have to do that, so they could go out and do that. And it affects how they are socially. Like, males aren't as risk averse as females are because of like resource expenditure and stuff like that. And same thing with choosing mates. So, like, yeah, all of those things kept kind of coding into things as time went on. That's what established it as the average.
Yeah.
So to act like there's no reason for them and that it's not tied to sex is kind of, but it's not heteronormative, it's not arbitrary, it's not new, like,
It's been around
evolutionarily
for
speaking.
It's been around for, millions of years when it comes to
Yeah.
hominids.
Yeah.
And then going back even further to male female reproduction and just the beginning of mammals,
Yeah.
500 million years ago. Those ultimate like differences in reproductive contribution.
Yeah.
That's the fundamental difference between the sexes.
And we can see that in other animals, like that their behaviors between male and female, like birds, even spiders, like it's
Now-
so, yeah, like we again, he said in the beginning, we are animals, we're not special that way. Well, we're not special when it comes to behavior that really is derived from sex on average.
We are special in the sense that we can analyze our behavior in our societal structure and find elements of that structure that are outdated and that can go away and that we don't need anymore.
Yeah.
But just because certain things evolved biologically to favor males versus females in terms of resources or roles doesn't mean that we have to keep every single societal construct.
Right.
But it also doesn't mean that those ultimate differences don't exist on the reproductive level and the behavioral level on average, right? So you can have both things. You just got to be actually nuanced about it and understand that there's some things that are societally constructed and that can be dispensed with. Others that can't.
Like wearing certain colors.
Yeah, like wearing certain colors.
Yeah.
Or even like some of the certain jobs that people decide to do to a degree. Like it's the same kind of thing. Okay.
Gender is just the term that we use for how an individual organism expresses their sexual identity in a cultural context. It is a reflection of that individual's expectations and the society's expectations of their behavior. And just to really drive that point home, let's take a look at a few examples to show just how fuzzy gender really is. We've talked a little bit about sexual dimorphism. There are some species where the males are bigger and stronger than the females. There are also some species where the females are bigger and stronger than the males. And then there are a lot more species that are not dimorphic at all, and so the males and females are completely indistinguishable from one another.
They're not completely distinguishable from one another because even in the species that have little dimorphism, like not much difference between the body size or behavior between males and females.
Yeah.
They're still different because they have different reproductive systems that produce different gamete types, sperm or eggs.
Yeah.
That is the fundamental difference.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they don't exist. And that like, again, he's conflating the sex binary, male and female, with the level of dimorphism in certain species of males and females.
Yeah. Which, again, he's bringing up animals right after he brought up people, and
he's going back and he's
animals. Not giving a reason as to why. Like, I gave a reason as to why is because because of the resource expenditure or whatever, that's why certain behaviors might have developed in males and females, like in humans. And we can see that in other animals as well. But he's bringing it up kind of out of nowhere and not explaining why.
Yeah. We'll see. Let's see what he says.
There are also plenty of species that have 3 or more genders or no genders at all. There are even some species where the males take multiple forms. Some of those forms resemble females. There are other species like hyenas where the females are so indistinguishable from the males that it's really hard to tell the difference without like dissecting them because the females have a fully erectile pseudopenis.
So he's saying that we can't distinguish between the female and male and the hyena because the female has a really long, what's called pseudopenis. It's actually a clitoris. It's a gigantic external clitoris through which she conceives and gives birth, like like receives the sperm and gives birth. These hyenas do not have a vaginal canal like regular mammals. They're unique in that way. But we know which one is the female based on which one conceives, ovulates, gestates, and gives birth, right? And the females tend to be really aggressive in the hyena species, but they're still females.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we know the difference, and you can tell the difference. It's subtle, but you can tell.
Also, what species is he talking about with 3 genders?
I don't know. I didn't say, but and what does he mean by 3 genders? Does he mean like different types of behavioral profiles, maybe?
Maybe.
They're still male or female based on their what gametic contribution they provide.
I mean, the only thing that can come to mind is like a female or a male that might be more or less like dominant.
Yeah.
Or something.
But then is he saying that they're not male or female because they're not they don't fit the roles of their sex?
That comes down to like hierarchy and stuff.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, arguably you can say humans have social hierarchy. Like, does that make us different genders depending on like where we are? Like,
he likes to claim
in the pecking order.
He likes to claim that there's like that there shouldn't be like subspecies, or that would be like ridiculous to say that. But then he's upholding categories that are constructed like by saying that, oh, because this male in this species behaves differently, that, oh my gosh, we don't know which one's male or female.
Yeah.
Isn't that really regressive?
It is.
And it obfuscates what male and female actually are.
He started off by saying women can fix cars and men can fix,
yeah, and then going to other animals. Like,
then he's like, oh, but then this makes you something else. Doesn't make you male or female.
No, they're male or female. They just have diverse ways of like expressing their behavior.
Like, what's the gender role for somebody who's non-binary then? Like, is he saying that like now he's saying if somebody behaves a certain way that makes them a gender?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that changes their sex or their sexual identity, as he said. Like, then he's basing sexual identity on regressive behavior stereotypes.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, no.
So after the hyena, he's going to bring up bats. Let's listen to this.
Okay, sure, of course.
There are fruit bats in Borneo and Malaysia where the males lactate to feed the babies. And even human males have mammary glands that can be triggered to develop and even produce milk given the right circumstances, no matter what your chromosomes look like.
You don't say.
So the male bats that can lactate, they're a special type of fruit bat, and they found that their mammary glands and nipples were not as large as the females, and the amount of milk was only about 1/10 of that produced by the females. And guess what? Males were never observed nursing the young. So what's the cause? Why are they producing milk in these fruit bat males? Well, one reason might be related to diet. These fruit bats eat fruit, but they also eat leaves that contain estrogen-like compounds called phytoestrogens, which can stimulate milk production.
Mm-hmm.
So this ability for the males to produce milk could serve no functional purpose at all, ultimately. And even if they did lactate just like the females, it would not call into question which bat is male versus which bat is female.
Again, going back to the seahorses or penguins or any male that is male and just that species of animal does things differently than what humans or another species might do. Like, it doesn't change the fact that they produce the small gametes. They're the ones that fertilize the egg. They just have a different adaptation or behavior
Mhm.
that is contrary to what might exist in other species, which we've already established that even chromosomes can be different in other species when it comes to sex determination. So then why are we bringing it up? What does it matter? Why are we bringing it up in comparison to humans? I don't understand where he's going with any of this.
And then the milk
Like,
production in human males, he was talking
yeah,
about too, that human males can lactate.
under like very specific circumstances.
And it's not the
And
same milk
yeah, it's
produced by
not,
the mom.
no. Yeah. And it takes a lot of intervention unless there's a hormonal issue.
So it's kind of similar to the fruit bat example.
Yeah.
In that the fruit bats, they have smaller nipples, the males don't have smaller nipples,
Yeah.
they produce a lot less milk, and they don't even use it to nurse the young because there's not enough nutrients in that milk.
Yeah, there
Same
isn't.
thing with the human males.
So, yeah. And when males have done that, they are depriving a baby of
Yeah.
nutrients.
Which should be
That-
considered child abuse.
Yes.
Okay.
There are lots of species where the males impregnate the females and the females give birth. There are other species where the females deposit eggs inside the male and then the male gives birth. There are some
Like the seahorses, but the seahorse male does not give birth. He just
Right.
releases the eggs out of the pouch,
Yeah.
and they were fertilized by his sperm. So he's obviously still a male.
Yeah.
It doesn't change that.
species where the males, not the females, tend to the nest and watch over the eggs. There are other species where they take turns. There are lots and lots of species that
And,
are
yeah.
patriarchal and the males control the group. There are lots and lots of other species that are matriarchal and the females control the group.
How do you define male and female, Forrest? You keep using the terms like you know what they mean.
A lot of primate species, even some of our closest relatives, are matriarchal, not patriarchal. In fact, there are several species where being a big, strong, dominant alpha male would mean no female ever mates with you. And as I said in the beginning of this video, humans are not special in any of this. We are just animals. The one cool thing that we've got going on for us is that we are the only animals that can communicate in great detail how it feels to have a gender. We should not be afraid of these differences between cis and trans and gay and straight or whatever. We should be excited for an opportunity to learn how life really works rather than just trying to cram everything down into boxes all the time.
Again, taxonomy.
Taxonomy, yeah.
And categorizing things is how we can understand. Like, you want to make people understand? That's how we understand what things are. If you call a water bottle a brick and I call it a water bottle, okay, we don't know that we're talking about the same thing. Like, until we can see what the person is referring to and understand why you're calling it that thing, and then we realize, oh crap, we have like a total fundamental misunderstanding of how like language works between each other. We need to sit down for a long time and discuss what shared terms we have and how to, like, that's again, like, that's how we've come to understand other languages. And
Just like how we can only
Yes.
know what trans means if we can only know what trans means if we know that trans means a person of one sex identifying as
Yes.
the opposite sex.
we need to know what sex is to know what trans is.
Yes.
We
Trans
need,
people
like-
would not exist if male and female did not exist.
Yes. Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh.
Gay people, lesbians would not
Yes.
exist if male and female did
I
not
would
exist.
not have gender dysphoria if I did not have revulsion over my sexed body, my reality, like what is there. Like, which, by the way, again, is not normal or good or fun or something that I should celebrate or be happy about. Like, buddy, no. Like, no. Like, just, ugh.
If we want to understand what it means to be anything, we need to focus on science and be listening to the people who are living the
my
lives
God.
that we want to understand.
What do you have to say about that, Cynthia?
To take his own
Advice.
gall darn advice.
Yeah. Listen to
Like-
science. Listen to the people who lived with those disorders, for example.
Yeah.
Or with dysphoria.
Instead
or...
of just saying that they could grow antlers or a mane. Like, you might just want to listen to them and
Yeah.
about how you're spreading misinformation that's hurting them in the real world and taking their insurance coverage away and things like that, because you're destigmatizing
Or
and normalizing their condition to the point
Yeah.
where people aren't seeing it as a condition that needs to be treated and can hurt them. Like,
yeah, exactly.
like, really,
I can't imagine
really.
having a DSD like the ones he described, and then hearing it described that way. It just would be really like it would really hurt really bad.
Yeah, like, really just high five right to the face.
And speaking of understanding, let's take a minute to talk about brains. Now,
Oh.
So this is the section.
Yay, I don't have
yeah.
to listen to him again for this part of
This
the
is
section.
the neuroscience section that we did with NeuroSGS on Twitter. His name is Sammy. He's a PhD neuroscience student, and he knows a lot about this section on neuroscience of sex differences and the brain sex hypothesis that Forrest will describe in this section. So we will link this video in the description and right here on the video, and you can access that. And we'll skip through this section and then resume after he ends the neuroscience section, after you see that with Sammy. So,
but that's just a supposition, so let's get back to science and wrap things up. So if you've been following along, we've covered that there are at least 3 different areas of the brain that are dimorphic between the sexes, and they each vary independently of one another. So that means you have 2 different possibilities in 3 different regions, so 2 times 2 times 2 is 8 different ways that your brain could be structured between what you might call just male or just female.
So
you can have 8 brain sex structures.
Just to clarify this, based on the neuroscience section, which we covered in the other video, males and females don't have a single thing that you can call a male brain versus a female brain. There's no black and white dichotomy. There are average differences within brains of males and brains of females. It doesn't mean that if you have an atypical structure in your brain, that you're suddenly the opposite sex. Just as though if you have an atypical height as a male, like you're really short, that doesn't make you less male or female, right? It's that same kind of concept. So let's continue.
If you factor in what kind of gonads you have, either testes or ovaries, that's another times 2. But you could also have neither, and you could also have both. So we really should be saying times 4, but just for convenience sake, we'll say another times 2.
You can't multiply all of the combinations together as if they're equal. Like having both ovaries and testicular tissue inside due to a genetic disorder, that is so unbelievably rare. It's like 1 in 100,000 births. Like, that is incredibly rare. You can't just multiply all these things together and act like, oh, you could just end up with any of these combinations. Like, that's not science. That's not data. That's not reality. It's just wrong. Let's continue.
So that means that you have at least 16 different configurations of what you could presumably call someone's gender. And we haven't even factored in sexual orientation. You would have to make different permutations for gay, for straight, for bisexual, for pansexual, for asexual. We haven't factored in intersex people. We haven't factored in Klinefelter syndrome, where you have XXY, that's 3 sex chromosomes. We haven't factored in Turner syndrome, where you have X and then nothing else. We haven't factored in whether you have a penis or a vagina, or both, or
This is what's called a Gish-gallop, which is to list so many different facts, or even not facts, just lies, to make your opponent seem overwhelmed, like and not know how to respond, right? And all this stuff is irrelevant, like to what sex is. And he lists developmental disorders that result in infertility, that still, let me tell you, result in males or females based on the body they develop. And 2, he lists, like, I forgot, like, there's so many different things already. Like, he's trying to
sexual orientation.
Yeah, sexual orientation. Your sexual orientation does not change your sex or make sex undefinable. In fact, the only way we can define sexual orientation is in reference to sex, in reference to male and female.
Here's the other thing. Like, first of all, you can't have both sets of genitals. That's just not something that you can have.
Yeah, you cannot have both sets of genitals because the systems are mutually antagonistic. Again, like I said before, as one system develops, the other one is inhibited. And our bodies and our genitalia actually start from a bipotential state they start from a similar embryonic origin. So, for example, the penis and the clitoris, they start from a similar embryonic origin, but due to genetics and hormones, they develop down different paths. One turns into a clitoris, one turns into a penis. It's the urogenital area that develops that way. So just because we have a similar origin in those tissues doesn't mean that they're interchangeable. It doesn't mean that you can have both. You cannot have both.
Also, he's trying to now claim that all of these things factor into your gender, which then he says there's this many, right? Like this many. And it's like, okay, so all of those many have a definition each that is like, you know, solid and measurable. No, I bet he'd say no. Like,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
just.
And even with like the rates of these different conditions, like Klinefelter syndrome that he mentioned, it happens in around 0.1% of births. With Turner syndrome, it's a similar percentage.
Yeah.
And these aren't really common.
Like,
they're really rare chromosomal disorders that impact males and females.
Yeah. He's suggesting now that not only, even though he said there's not, you know, anything that makes you a man or woman from a behavioral standpoint, because, you know, you can have a certain job or you can wear a dress or order a fruity drink or whatever, like no matter which sex you are, which is true. Now he's trying to say that there is some measurable criteria that makes you that gender or dictates your sexual identity or gender or whatever he wants to call it right now. I don't really know which way he wants to go since he's been all over the place with it. So like there is a way that males and females behave, or there is a way that presents itself. Like, is he gonna pick a lane? Is he ever gonna land on any kind of consistency? Or
yeah, he sounds like he's saying now that like every individual is unique with no things that make people different or all these different things that make people so different that we can't categorize anybody as anything.
But he's also saying there are categories.
Yeah.
16 or 32 or what, like, okay, what are they?
Yeah. And what's their function?
And like why now are there categories? Like can't you just, it's your sex is just your body.
Why can't you accept, I don't understand,
like,
why can't people who are arguing similar points accept that there's just variation within males and variation within females?
Yeah, like he was talking about that, like that, why can't we just accept that? But he's the one not accepting it.
Yeah, he's
the one saying, oh well, I can't accept that because there's, you know, these things factor into your gender. Like, no.
He's othering people from their sex based on atypical differences.
Yeah, like males and females have variation within their sex, and they can like be outside averages and things like that.
I mean,
so
imagine
like,
telling
what is your problem?
Imagine telling a woman with Turner syndrome who develops with only one X chromosome and whose ovaries fail.
Yeah.
They can't produce eggs. Imagine telling a woman who develops with that condition that she's not a female.
Yeah.
Or somehow this new category of human or something.
That has to affect or play into her gender identity or sexual identity or whatever.
These conditions have pretty much no impact on that.
That's seriously messed up. Like, this Forrest guy is like not a good guy, like, at all. I don't like him. You can't. He tries to act like he's so accepting and inclusive by saying this stuff, but no, he's being extremely exclusionary.
Yeah.
And like a regressive creep. Like, no.
Neither, or more than one of one or the other, which happens from time to time.
He said that you can have more than one of one or the other genitalia. Yeah. Like double penis, double vagina. I don't think that can happen. Definitely cannot. I don't think I've never heard of a human born with two penises or two vaginas.
Oh my god.
I mean, that can't even happen because of the way that sex development works.
I just love that he's doing these wild hand gestures.
Where does the
to
second
thing
penis
it.
come from, Cynthia?
Your heart.
there
Believe.
there is no tissue. Like if you already develop the penis, that tissue has been used. There's no other tissue that's going to develop into another penis. Like that tissue that's the urogenital sinus that develops, like, yeah,
I
where does that
mean,
come from? Like it's
like, I could see how maybe conceivably in like a failed twin situation where like you were developing as a twin and then something went wrong,
right.
maybe. Maybe.
But technically it'd be like two people conjoined.
Yeah. And it probably wouldn't be like a functional,
Viable.
viable. It'd be
Yeah.
like vestigial at best. Like,
Or even the fetus itself would be non-viable, or they couldn't
yeah.
survive.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
God. I don't even know where to go with this because again, he's acting like could just happen to anybody.
Yeah.
Anytime. Do you might have ovaries now? Did you
Yep.
check?
You might have ovaries and a double penis.
Oh my God. Well, when we're done with this.
If you really, really
gonna
want to push the
scream.
idea that everybody fits into just one out of however many boxes, you are very quickly going to have to come up with dozens, if not hundreds, of different categories just to fit this insanely parochial worldview you're keeping.
Nope.
This insanely parochial worldview, parochial worldview that he mentioned, like you mean the worldview that there's just two sexes in almost all plant and animal species, and that genetic abnormalities and disorders don't call into question the existence of those two sexes.
Yep, and that those two sexes can dress or have any job they want to have. So.
Yep, and that the only way we can treat genetic disorders is by first knowing what sex that person is, what development path they were on, where it went off from the standard template.
Yeah, how awful we are to have that view. Oh man.
It is so much easier just to say that things like sex and gender and sexual orientation exist on a spectrum.
Nope.
And while it is entirely possible that you're like 100% straight or 100% female, it's also at least equally possible that you land somewhere along this fuzzy gradient.
So he said it's easier to say that sex is just a spectrum.
No.
And it might actually be easier on a superficial level if you don't understand what sex is, like by just looking at all this variation in biology and saying, "Oh my gosh, wow, I guess there aren't just two sexes." Well, you're not understanding what sex actually is, what the sexes actually are. You have a superficial understanding at best of biology and how traits function and how systems work together as a whole for reproduction.
Yeah.
Like, it's not easier. It's wrong, and it's also completely superficial at best.
Then you would have to explain, like, why, despite this alleged spectrum, we can only reproduce via males and females.
Yeah, this spectrum ignores evolution.
Yeah.
It ignores development. It ignores how people's bodies are organized around different reproductive functions. And it makes it seem like people are just these unique, independent set of characteristics that don't have any functional correlations to anything.
Yeah.
Like we can't operate in the world with that ideology.
I mean, sure, Forrest, it's always easier to lie, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, it's always easier to just make something up. Sure.
And again, unless you have had your brain scanned and your genome sequenced,
What would my
you
brain
have
scan
no
have to do with
idea
it?
where you land on this deeply ramified line at this very moment. And
At this very moment, like my chromosomes can change at any moment.
So like again, we've covered this again. He keeps saying this stuff, but we've done the studies. We know the genetics. We know that almost every single birth results in XX or XY, and typical male or female reproductive systems. And then on top of that, what would a brain scan show?
So my ovaries could be anywhere right now, Zach.
Yeah.
So could yours.
Yeah. What would the brain scan show?
I don't know.
As we discussed in the neuroscience video, the brain sections that he uses, the literature is either incredibly inconsistent, the sample size is either very small, or it's confounded by sexual orientation, by taking cross-sex hormones. by post-mortem studies.
By, mice
And by mice. Some of the ones he used were actually just studies in mice,
and
trying to
not
correlate gender
people,
identity in humans, and
which,
completely different brain regions than
yeah,
humans.
which again, because of the way that mouse brains end up processing estrogen and testosterone through aromatase is very different
You
than
can't
humans. You
connect
can't
it
compare
one to
them,
one. Yeah.
no, to the human brain studies. So,
Yep.
checkmate, I guess. Like, what do you have now?
Yep.
That shouldn't bother you. It should make you curious. But to go on telling people
It does make me curious, and I
Yeah.
also have a understanding that it doesn't make somebody not male or female.
Yeah. The fact that there's only two sexes with variation in between shouldn't bother you, bud.
Yep.
But it does. A lot.
It bothers him deeply.
It really does. And
Yeah.
you shouldn't spread misinformation about it just because it bothers you. That's harmful.
things like you're XY and that means you're a boy and boys act like this is not only preposterously inaccurate,
Those two
it is
things-
cruel and dangerous.
Those two things are completely different. Saying that a boy is XY on the overwhelming majority of boys are XY, and that boys need to act like this, two totally different things that are not connected.
Yeah, it's conflating two things. One, the chromosomal mechanisms for
Yeah.
determining sex, and then two, it's conflating gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, we know what a boy is. It's
Yeah.
a male human who has not developed to maturity yet,
Yeah.
who's not an adult, a child. And also that
Like,
doesn't
the-
mean, yeah.
The only time I would ever say like a boy should act like this is like, well, boys shouldn't have a job and a mortgage. Like that's about it. Like
Yeah.
same with a girl. Like that's for adults. That's the only
Yeah.
time I'd be like, hey, don't be, a boy who goes out to the coal mines. Like that's the only thing that
Yeah.
I would say.
So
Like,
saying that a person, an infant born as a male, that's a boy,
yeah.
an infant boy, that's cruel and dangerous. It's critical for
guess
that
so.
boy to understand that he's a male,
Yeah.
that how his body developed and what that means.
Right.
And
And
it's also important
Yeah.
for him to understand that he can behave and express himself in a variety of ways, and that behaving in atypical ways does not make him not male.
Yeah.
It doesn't make him female. He's still a male.
Yeah.
So why is Forrest conflating those two things? He's saying we can't recognize sex
right.
in humans.
When I was a little girl and I thought I would grow up to be a man because no one really told me what a girl was or a boy was before that, or that they would become a man or a woman, or that I was one or the other. Like, that was really damaging to me psychologically at the time because it really shattered my worldview that I was not going to grow up to be a man. Because I had, like, it sets up your expectations for what you will be and how to relate to the world. Like,
So having this idea that you're just born as a blank slate with
Yeah.
with no sex, basically, that
Yeah.
idea actually could cause a lot of people to develop gender dysphoria
yeah.
by thinking that, oh, I should just develop into whatever I think is right,
Yeah.
and not actually have an understanding of the reality of what body they're
Right.
in and what that means.
Exactly. And then I spent a long, long time, like a big part of my childhood, trying to figure out like how to reconcile that because I had no idea. And this was like a foundational belief for me.
Yeah.
So, like,
And then what helped you
Yeah.
actually recognize that
that I
You-
could just be a girl.
could just be a girl,
and
a
not,
female.
Yeah, a female that could do whatever, just and didn't change anything and didn't mean anything harmful, really. Like, honestly, being exposed to that kind of messaging on TV because my family was very regressive with gender roles and that kind of thing because you're Cuban. So just knowing that, oh, okay, well, I'm a female and that doesn't mean anything as far as like what I can do for a job or who I can marry or like what is expected of me from society. Like I can just go out and get a job and get an education and like play sports or like be with a woman if I want to, like if that's my because I'm bisexual, so I can like make that choice unlike somebody who's like gay or heterosexual. So like yeah, and I knew about my sexuality very early on. So like it was really reassuring to me hearing the messaging that, oh, okay, just because I have the body I have doesn't restrict me to like experiences, really, like when it comes to social stuff. Like if I want to have all male friends, I can do that. If I want to play sports, I can do that. And it didn't change anything. Like
Yeah.
that was what really helped growing up.
Yeah.
That was really comforting to me. So for him to sit here and act like, I don't know, like there's some weird, like it's just all like interchangeable and whatever, it's a blank slate. Like no, that's not helpful. That kind of stuff like stressed me out more. So
because then you're not grounded in reality. You're not grounded in your
yeah,
body. You're not grounded in that just that piece of knowing who you are.
right. Like it made me think there was something wrong with me. It
Yeah.
made me think I had like internal like parts that meant something and that
Hmm.
oh it had to be like connected to my body, that I was atypical like as a
Yeah.
girl. Like no, just some people are atypical in their behavior, like, and it has nothing to do with your sex. Like you can be an XX female or an XY male and be atypical in your behavior or your presentation or like your sexuality. Like that's fine. Like it doesn't need to be like he's acting like everybody else is creating the categories that they are creating. Like they are creating all the extra categories and all the extra crap with like the genders and the gender expression and like all like
Yeah, this is an
no.
interesting thing that I've noticed is that if you look back on like regressive views on people who have disorders of sex development or any disorder, um, specifically with disorders of sex development, they were often, oh, you're a third sex,
Yeah.
you're not male or
And
female,
he's doing
right?
that again.
And yeah, and what people are doing now is doing the same thing,
Yeah.
but now they're like, oh, they are a third sex, they're between sexes, and that's a
Yeah.
good thing, and that's
Yeah.
the truth. And also, people who even have these disorders have bought into the lie and are saying as well, oh no, I am a third sex, and that's great. Like,
Yeah.
or I'm neither sex, and it's like, but that's a lie. It's not true.
Yeah, and again, it's going to affect their health care. It's going to affect their lives. Like it it's it's not healthy. It's really not. Like just you're a male or a female, it mostly just affects like medical stuff or like stuff that involves like physical things like biology or whatever, like in sports. Like, you know, it affects certain average behavior patterns or whatever. Like it doesn't affect how you have to like live your life. Like I said, you can all
Yeah,
still have like atypical interests and atypical sexuality or whatever. We don't need to create all of these extra like lesser and greater
yeah,
male categories on this spectrum and whatever. Like we don't need to do that. Like
yeah.
it's so much simpler. Just like I don't understand again who he thinks he's helping, but it's actually no one.
Which brings me to why I care. As someone who is cisgendered and at least mostly straight, you could argue that I don't have a dog in this fight. But the fact of the matter is, I am a scientist and an educator. I care about the truth. I care about human beings, and I especially care about the next generation. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among people from the ages of 10 to 24. Lots of young people think about it. I thought about it at that time. But LGBT people in that age group are almost 5 times as likely to have attempted suicide than their heterosexual peers. And what's worse, LGBT youth who report coming from non-accepting and non-supportive families are 8 times more likely than the other LGBT youth to have attempted suicide. So we're talking about 8 times more likely than the people who are already 5 times more likely than the people who are already stressed the hell out to try to kill themselves. And all of this is hugely exacerbated by the fact that you have idiots on TV and on the internet saying, aha, this high suicide rate proves that this is all a mental disorder. No, it proves that these poor kids are being treated like perverts and freaks for just trying to exist.
Wait. Being gay is not a mental disorder, neither is being bisexual. It's just your sexual orientation.
He's conflating people with gender dysphoria with people who are gay or bisexual.
Having gender dysphoria, I'm going to try not to get emotional here. Yep. Having gender dysphoria is a mental disorder, okay? Like, it's very hard for me to get, like, really... Because again, in spite of all of the offensive crap he says in this video and all of his smug attitude about it, I want to hope that he's actually humane on some level enough to understand what I'm about to say to him. Having gender dysphoria is absolutely a mental disorder. Wanting to cut out my genitals as a child because I was terrified and disgusted by them is not normal. Wanting to vomit when my partner, the father of my child, is reading to me about the daughter developing in my womb because it feels so alien and wrong to have that going on in my body, is a mental disorder. It is not remotely the same as being attracted to women as a female. It is not normal. It does not need to be celebrated. It should not be celebrated. And it should absolutely, on no level, be encouraged in anyone, especially not children. And it should absolutely be treated with therapy and understanding, and not with this lie that we can change sex and that it is arbitrary and everything else. No, that is disgusting to lie to people that way and encourage this delusional thinking. No, you are a disgusting person for perpetuating that. And you are a disgusting person for perpetuating that people with DSDs and things like that are just, just a normal thing. And they don't need treatment. And they don't need the understanding of the medical community and everything of sex and their bodies that they require. Like, that is awful. You are an awful person for saying those things. And I desperately hope that you come around to realizing this and that you behave accordingly. Like, you rectify all the damage you have done, because you have done damage. You have misinformed and misled people on a profound level. And again, I will say, you are not helping. Like, I have really, really tried to not think of you as a bad person, but I can no longer do that. You have so vehemently, said things that are easily disproved and that are just morally reprehensible, while then trying to condemn people for actually wanting to help others, for actually wanting to spread truth. So no, I really, really, really hope that you change and grow as a person and don't keep doing this, because it is disgusting. And I'm sorry for getting emotional, I really am, but this is very personal to me. That's why I care. That's why I care. You don't have a dog in this fight, bud. You really don't. Like, you it's not that you're cis and mostly heterosexual. No. You are a healthy man psychologically, other than like your willful spread of misinformation, your deep misunderstanding. I just hope you're misguided, honestly. But other than that, you're healthy psychologically, assumedly. You are healthy physically, again, assumedly. Like, you seem like a healthy person. So, no, it is deeply offensive. You do not have a dog in this fight to be spreading this misinformation this way on this scale. Like, no. Like, you do not speak for me. You do not speak for people like me. You do not speak for people with those conditions. Like, no, you are hurting us. This is not what good people do. Like, so sorry, but yeah, I really hope you see this message that I'm sending you right now. Like, I tried to be playful about like my distaste for you and what you're doing, but because I don't like actually hating people and being angry with people, but no, like, I can't just keep playing around with it. Like, it's not okay.
And when a person is saying that these disorders, that gender dysphoria, that all these things are not actually disorders, they're just normal variations, and that like this takes away from the importance of medical treatment, of psychological care. It takes away from the real like experience of having these conditions,
Yeah.
and how traumatizing they can be, how life altering they can be, how they've brought people to suicide.
Yeah. Do you know how desperately I really, really, really wanted to not be a typical female physically? Like, growing up, I really wanted to believe, like, things that I believed were things that, like, I actually had an internal penis somewhere that eventually doctors would find, and it would prove that I wasn't meant to be a girl or something like that. Like, to lie to people and say that that's possible, like, oh my God. Like, no, that's not
It's
okay.
actually it's actually fostering mental illness
Yes,
in
like that
people.
kind of stuff, that
Yeah.
kind of messaging
It fosters
is
anxiety,
so
depression,
harmful. Like,
obsessive
yes.
thoughts related to gender dysphoria. Like, it is just, it's really awful. It really is.
And again, I don't know if you'll actually care about anything that I'm saying to you right now. I really don't. I don't know what kind of person you are. Like, right now, I do not have a high opinion of you at all. Um, but I need to say it for me and for others. Like, you're terrible. Like, that, saying all of those things is terrible, and acting like you're saying it from a place of like kindness and education, like you're trying to help people, like, that's disgusting.
All
So
he's
yeah.
done is just muddied things
Yeah.
and taken away from the real deep traumatizing experiences of people with medical conditions.
Yeah. No. And by the way, like, encouraging kids with gender dysphoria to believe that at any moment they could find out that they have
Yeah.
internal like sex organs
Yeah.
of somebody else or whatever. Like, that's yeah, no, again, that's really awful. I cannot believe that you're doing that. Like, who does that? Like, who does that in good conscience? Like, that's awful. I've also seen that kind of rhetoric to be used at people with DSDs who suffer because of their conditions, and people tell them how lucky they are because they wish that they had Klinefelters, they wish they had Turners, they wish they had AIS because, oh, that would be so validating. Like, no, people like you are spreading that kind of thinking, and it's awful. It is deplorable. You should be ashamed of yourself. Like, really, genuinely ashamed of yourself. I am genuinely glad that I got exposed to this because honestly, like, it lets me know, like, what's out there as far as, like, creeps spreading misinformation and
Yeah, absolutely. No,
and whatever, but
nobody has taken him to task
yeah.
at this level yet. Like, nobody has gone through, at least not that I've seen, like, broken down everything, every single thing. And
Yeah.
that's what I wanted to do.
Yeah. No, and
And
I'm glad I
I'm
get
so
to do
glad
this.
we get to do this in detail because it needed to happen. It really did. The amount of misinformation, the amount of carelessness and bigotry towards people with medical
Yes.
conditions is just unreal. So,
And I'm glad
yeah.
I get to do this too, for again, and like people like me who had thoughts like that, or you know, even for my daughter when
Yeah.
she gets older, she'll know that creeps like this are liars and charlatans, like spreading grotesque misinformation with like this veneer of positivity and
Mhm.
kindness,
Yeah.
like, and it's all bunk.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that I got to see this, and I'm glad that I
Able to
really
express all your
yeah,
feelings about
and
it.
that I'm not sorry at all for being like for you know reacting any of the ways that I have throughout this whole thing. Like, I'm sorry if somebody thinks it's disrespectful for me again to have made faces or whatever during his stuff. But honestly, like, absurdist escapism through like
Yeah.
joking and that kind of thing is the only way I can watch this and not just
Yeah.
be shaking mad the whole time. Because I am really legitimately enraged.
It's absolutely warranted to feel all those things.
Yeah.
Like,
and I have been
there's
throughout
nothing.
this entire thing,
Yeah.
and legitimately like angry.
There's nothing wrong with feeling all
with
those
this
things. It's
misinformation and obfuscation, everything that he does.
yeah.
So, okay, 3.5 minutes to go. Can we
Yep.
get there?
So, he was conflating suicide statistics of he's just saying LGBT and then going into detail about, but he didn't really separate LGB versus T, and we know that trans people or people with gender dysphoria in general have
It's not the same.
much higher risk of suicide
Yeah.
and also high comorbidities like anxiety and depression
Yes.
compared to gays and bisexuals and lesbians. Different, very
Yeah.
different. And that's because ultimately having gender dysphoria is a mental illness.
Yes.
It is a disorder, a psychological
And
disorder.
it comes with a lot of other comorbidities. Like
Yeah.
you were saying.
Obsessive compulsive
Yeah.
disorder or eating disorders or anxiety disorders, depression, autism spectrum disorders. Yeah.
Yeah.
So these people are not hurting themselves
Yeah.
because society's not treating them properly. There's of course some people who
Like that can
Can.
happen.
but that is not the overwhelming majority.
Yeah.
The huge rates of comorbidities and the huge effort by society to celebrate this and to accept people all this evidence goes against the fact that they're
Mm-hmm.
supposedly being discriminated against, and that's the reason why they are hurting themselves so
Right.
much.
But I'll tell you what, like being, what did contribute to like my depression and things like that as a child with this were like these arguments that, I it's something wrong with my body. I was born in the wrong body. Like I as a 6-year-old was contemplating killing myself to try and restart like as the sex I was supposed to be. Like
Yeah.
having the idea that my body was wrong and I was trapped in it, that kind of language, you're trapped in your body. Like
Yeah.
trying to tell me that my body is wrong, like no, that's what you're doing ultimately with this.
Yep.
Like
No one is born in the wrong body.
no.
That is a metaphysical belief system that has no basis in reality.
Yeah. What I needed to be told was yes, this is my body. No, it can't change
Yeah.
like to the opposite sex, but that it's okay and it's not going to hurt me. That being female was not going to hurt me. And that I wasn't any more or less of a female than anybody else, even
Yeah.
though I didn't fit in. Even though I was atypical.
Yeah.
And
It
also,
it hurts those the most that are atypical,
yes.
that don't fit in.
And also, this stupid conflation with like sexuality.
Yeah.
Being attracted to females does not make me less female.
Yeah. The only people I've seen arguing that for some reason being attracted to females as a female makes you less female are people who are either bigoted traditionalists or people like Forrest who have this air of, being morally superior and thinking that they're
Yeah.
helping people when they're actively harming people.
Oh my gosh. Sorry. It'd be easier for me not to ugly cry if I didn't have like I wasn't pregnant too. Like,
It's okay, Cynthia.
sorry, I didn't mean to start up again.
Okay, so we can finish this out.
Yeah.
If the biggest problem that you're having in the 21st century is what people's genitals look like and what they're doing with their genitals in the company of other consenting adults, if that is the needle on your moral compass, I strongly encourage you to reevaluate your priorities.
So he's using the old school civil rights talking point of like, just leave us alone. We want to be able to do things in our own home, right? We don't want the government intruding into our lives. And I
Yeah.
completely agree. People
Yeah.
should be able to do pretty much whatever they want in their own homes as long as they're not hurting anybody, right? And on top of that, there are places in society or situations where it is important to know the person's sex.
Yes.
Sports are divided on the basis of sex due to the
Yes.
male performance advantage, the overwhelming male performance advantage that far outweighs equally trained females. And that's a safety and fairness risk for
Yeah.
females with males competing in sports. Males should not be in sports with females. And then the other thing is single sex spaces,
Yes.
like bathrooms and changing rooms and places where women and girls are vulnerable. And
because of those average behavioral patterns, males do commit sexual violence towards females a lot more than the other way around.
yeah, it doesn't mean that
or towards one another.
Yeah. It doesn't mean that all males or most males commit
Right.
sexual
It just
crimes,
means
but it
that
means
we
that
don't know which ones are going to do that, and that we know that based on statistics, like the majority of sex crimes like penises are weaponized and things like that. So like,
And that only males, for the most part, commit sexual crimes
yeah,
compared to
for the
females.
most part,
For the
yes.
most part, the overwhelming majority. It's that not. It's basically not. The majority of men don't commit, for example, rape, but it's usually only men that do so.
Yeah. It's, the
Yeah.
majority of them don't, but the majority of rapes are committed by men.
Yeah.
Like the overwhelming majority.
Yeah. Upwards of 90
Yeah.
plus 98% based on US statistics.
And yeah, so that's why those things are important too. And as a female who has experienced that too, Forrest, I can tell you that I really value single sex spaces where I am vulnerable, and so do a lot of other women. But I mean, yeah, I'm sure you would argue with us about that too. Again, as someone who has no dog in this fight,
And again, here, like, denying
yeah,
what male and female are
yeah,
really hurts
it
the
does.
ones that are most affected by sex, like women
It
and
does,
girls.
yeah. So,
And maybe you still don't believe me. Maybe you think that I've just gotten something totally wrong or that I misinterpreted the data.
know you
That's
did.
fine. I'm an evolutionary biologist and I mainly study bioanthropology. I am not a geneticist. I am not a developmental biologist. So I would hit
You're
the
not a
limit
good
of
person
my
either.
understanding in this topic well before I hit the limit of what there is to be understood. But I should point out that even considering that, I have not even scratched the surface of what I could have talked about here. But
To say that he barely scratched the surface is kind of it's like a compliment at best. What's really going on is he's actually just misinforming everybody, lying about what the reality is, muddying everything, obfuscating. It's not skimming the surface.
no.
Like, as I said, at best it's a superficial understanding, but that's
It's like,
not even.
did you even look at it?
Yeah, did you even look at it? Like,
Like, did you touch the surface?
yeah, like
He said he touched
I
the
made
surface.
I made a list of all the major things when it came to the biology of sex that he got wrong. He misused the terms dioecious and monoecious, as we described earlier. He conflates what determines sex on the genetic level with what defines sex, so the mechanisms that develop your sex versus what your sex is. And then he conflated sex characteristics across species and humans with sex itself, saying that if you have atypical sex characteristics, that you're not male or female, or that you have atypical behavior that you're not male or female, then we can't define the sexes. He claimed that hormones do not do anything. He also claimed that the idea that humans are born male or female is deeply flawed. He misunderstood the gamete size definition. He thought that gamete size is about the literal size and not about what the size differences represent for their roles in reproduction. How those two different sizes contribute different resources to the zygote. He also claimed that sperm variation, he misunderstood sperm variation. He thought that different sizes of sperm are evidence of new sexes. They're not. They're just different sizes of sperm. They all have the function of fertilizing the female's egg. He also used the infertility fallacy to argue that if something is not presently functioning, it cannot be categorized, which would just destroy medical treatment.
Yeah.
And also, and worse, that the definition should be abandoned as arbitrary. He conflated isogamy with anisogamy to argue that the definition of the sexes is arbitrary. It's not. Those are two completely different sexual systems. Isogamy has no sexes, and anisogamy, what humans have two sexes. He also argued that trans people have opposite sex brains, but after controlling for sexual orientation, we see that trans people who are homosexual have brains that are more typical of homosexuals, and trans people who are heterosexual have brains more typical of heterosexuals. So really what's going on in the trans brain argument is that there are differences on the areas that are controlling for body processing and self-processing and self-perception. He argued that there's no difference between healthy development and disordered development, and that is incredibly dangerous and destructive for people who have disorders to say to them that you don't need medical treatment, that your body does not need to be treated, that your psychological condition does not need to be treated, that you're just a healthy variation. It's very harmful to those people and minimizes their actual experiences. He argues that sex is a cluster of traits that all vary independently, but they do not. Your genes determine your gonadal tissue. Your gonads produce certain hormones that help build your internal and external genitalia. They're all interconnected. It's an entire system, dependent and ordered, and it is sequential and hierarchical.
Yeah.
He also claimed that humans can have both a penis and vagina, or even two penises, or two vaginas. And no human has been born with both a penis and vagina, and you cannot have both.
Also,
Double.
I mentioned this in the neuroscience video that we did. He is just saying trans people as opposed to people with gender dysphoria. Not all of us transitioned. We don't all like consider ourselves trans. We're not trans. We have gender dysphoria. There's a difference. And by saying that, like just trans people, you might make someone who has gender dysphoria but transition wouldn't work for, like me, like you might make them want to transition or make mistakes that they can't reverse, like medically. Like I considered very seriously whether or not to transition when I was younger, and I'm glad that I didn't. I'm so happy that I didn't, especially now with all of the studies about cross-sex hormones and puberty blockers and everything that we're seeing. Like, so yeah, like it's really harmful because you're pushing us all down that path, like arbitrarily. Again, you're doing this stupid thing where you're pushing us all down this path arbitrarily. Like, if you have gender dysphoria, you are trans. No, nope. And I'm not, I wouldn't consider myself, if I wasn't bisexual, I wouldn't consider myself LGBTQ, whatever, because I'm not a T and I'm not a Q. I'm a B, like, but I'm not like.
And just because somebody is maybe lesbian or gay or bisexual or
Yeah.
trans doesn't mean that they have all the same views as
Yeah.
as everybody else in that grouping.
Exactly.
You know, it's an incredibly
So
diverse grouping.
now who's like forcing an idea or pushing an idea? Like it's you. It's always you. It's you. You're pushing like really harmful, regressive crap, and like.
He looks really defensive right now.
Well, he always does.
All that being said, as a scientist and an educator, it is my job to cite my sources. So here's a list of some of the books and the studies and the peer-reviewed scientific papers that I use to make this video that support my arguments.
Except for the one about wallabies that doesn't exist, apparently.
Or misrepresented.
Yeah, or misrepresented.
We'll spare you this, but he scrolls through all the 230 something sources or so, and one problem with this is that it's a fast scrolling slide of hundreds of citations. They're not referenced to the specific claims that he made, so you don't know which citation is for what claim.
Or even if he used the
or
citation
even if he used the citation
video
at all, right?
Yeah.
So that's a major problem. This is what's called a Gish-gallop, I mentioned before, listing a bunch of just information that might not have anything to do with what he's specifically saying, and trying to overwhelm the opponent with complexity or with a dump of information. And so he says to read those and get back to him, knowing full well that it's not reasonable for someone to who's trying to first learn about the topic to do that, right? They have nowhere to start, no clue where to start. So it's not actually helping people learn.
No. And further, again, like I said, there's no way to know if he used all of these citations in the making of this video. There's no way to know if like which ones he's misrepresenting or like anything like that either. Like clearly he is misrepresenting a fair amount of these.
When I wrote my books on sex and gender, every time I had a claim, a scientific claim, I cited it with a footnote on that page. And it will say the author's name and the date that it was written. And you can go to the bibliography and look at the full citation. And you can see, oh, Zach claimed this here, and he said that this was backed up by this citation.
Right.
So now I can go see the full citation name, look up the paper, read it, and see if it matches what I'm saying, right?
And again,
he didn't do that at all here.
Right. Clearly, I'm saying clearly he misrepresented some of these because I can see, like, just the ones that are up on the screen. Like, I mean... we've gone through some of these because of your stuff.
Yeah, a lot of these
So,
sources I've actually used in
yeah.
my gender paradox book, in the videos that I've created
Yeah.
at the Paradox Institute, and in the articles we've done. Many of these studies are cited there,
Yeah.
but
And like,
they don't back up
no.
what his overarching claims are.
No, and we know from having gone through all the studies that we've gone through
Yeah.
with sex stuff that like he's not supporting any of his ideas with actual biology or anything like that. Like, yes, he's regurgitating certain facts
Yeah.
from biology,
But misrepresenting
yeah,
them in the
misrepresenting
context.
what they mean in
Yeah.
the context, and for some reason applying them to people, like when some of them don't have anything to do with people, or again, like saying things about people with DSDs that isn't true, and things like that. So,
For example, you can see here that he cited Bell, 1978, The Evolution of Anisogamy, Journal of Theoretical Biology. This is one of the sources I've used to back up my claims with how the two sexes evolved.
yeah.
And this is part of the long, extensive body of research on the evolution of male and female. These biologists know what male and female are.
Yeah.
They're very clear about that in the literature. And anyone who has a good understanding of the literature and who's read these studies will know what they mean, what male and female are because of that. And he's just misrepresenting these completely. Another thing I want to say is that he's shown that he's not interested in clarifying and teaching or helping others learn. He's interested in pushing a specific agenda and making those who are not deeply educated in biology feel overwhelmed with all the complexity and all the citations, but with no helpful method to verify what he's saying.
And for pushing, I mean, it seems like pushing those of us who don't fit like within normal or like average male female like behaviors or body types or, you know, development, into believing that we are something other.
Yeah.
And that's not okay either. Like, that's really messed up. And he's leading people to believe that about us too.
Yeah.
Like, no.
So here's what I will do. So for those of you that are on YouTube and can access the description of this video, I will break down this entire feature-length video into timestamp sections, dividing it into the topic. And then for every single timestamp section, I will have peer-reviewed citations listed there for every claim. So each peer-reviewed citation will be linked to the timestamp. So you can see when we're talking about something or responding to Forrest's points, you can see what literature that we're using to back up our specific points. And that way it's very clear, instead of what he did, which is just dump sources without linking them to the specific claims.
Yeah. Well, all he knows how to do is just like dump stuff and regurgitate and like deconstruct. So.
And ultimately that leaves you with no ability to operate in the world, no ability to treat people who need help, no ability to understand ourselves and our society. It's a recipe for just the dismantling of objective reality, like of being able to operate in the world. So that's ultimately what this video is about. It's about obfuscation, muddying the actual truth of sex and sex development. Mm-hmm. And to make it seem like we all just exist on this arbitrary spectrum, and there's no way to define really anything. And it's an awful, awful worldview, and it's led to so many, to the erosion of so many things in our society.
Yeah. And to real world harms for people who have problems that Forrest will never understand, like gender dysphoria or like a DSD. Like, he's never gonna get it. Mm-hmm. Like, he'll say he does, he doesn't, and he won't. So whatever. I really hope that he grows a conscience and stops spreading misinformation, because I'd rather not see more people get hurt because of people like him.
Thanks for listening, guys. I know this was a long one, but we wanted to detail out every single point and make sure that we addressed everything Forrest said. So appreciate you listening and watching, and
I'm sorry for crying in your ears.
I'm glad you got all your feelings out and were able to express all that.
Yeah.
That was important, I think.
Yeah.
And for people who
Yeah.
relate to your experiences or relate to similar things, I think that was helpful too for people to hear. So
Yeah. It's still embarrassing, kind of.
it's
But,
okay.
but yeah.
Thank you guys.
Thank you for listening.